Welcome to my channel. Hogwarts. I'm practically a culinary master, and only now they're calling me to Hogwarts. Chapter 1. London, Britain. Graves Manor. Halt. Intruders will die. All personnel, be on alert. This is the residence of young Master Luke Graves. Who exactly are you people? Shyvana, the head maid and security manager of Luke's residence, looked both horrified and vigilant. Just moments ago, an old man with a silver-white beard and a woman who had transformed from a cat and wore black-rimmed glasses appeared inside the residence as if they had been squeezed out of thin air. Shyvana instinctively sensed the terrifying threat contained within them. Whoosh tilde. Following Shyvana's summons, countless figures dressed in maid outfits, yet wielding sharp swords or grasping truth, instantly appeared around the spacious courtyard. On top of the distant high tower, someone seemed to be keeping watch. Shyvana, dressed in a black silk maid outfit, drew her twin swords, which emitted a faint red and blue glow. Her sharp eyes fixed on the two people. State your intentions, or die. A hint of surprise flashed in the eyes of the silver-bearded Dumbledore. He immediately smacked his lips and smiled at McGonagall, saying, Minerva, wasn't I right? Although he is only just reaching the age for enrollment, he is quite an extraordinary figure in this Muggle world. McGonagall nodded, gently waving the wand in her hand. The water from the huge fountain in the center of the residence immediately surged backward, instantly transforming into a translucent crystal shield that defended against the surroundings. Dumbledore nodded in praise of McGonagall, but spoke gently to the tall and beautiful Shyvana. We are here to see Mr. Luke Graves. I had an owl inform him beforehand. Inside the residence's dining room, only a sizzling soup pot emitted an enticing aroma. Completely oblivious, Luke leaned against the long table, weighing a letter in his hand. On the front, Luke Graves, Moke Street. On the back was a wax seal bearing the Hogwarts crest, consisting of a large capital, H, surrounded by a lion, a serpent, an eagle, and a badger. The letter, written in emerald green ink, carried a mysterious and ancient medieval feel. Hogwarts School of Magic. Principal, Albus Dumbledore. Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, President of the International Association of Wizards, Chief Warlock of the Wizengamot, First-Class Sorcerer of the Order of Merlin. Dear Mr. Luke Graves, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to study at Hogwarts School of Magic. Enclosed with this letter is a list of necessary books and equipment. Given your circumstances, we will be sending a professor to answer any questions you may have. He will arrive no later than 8 o'clock this evening. Deputy Principal, Minerva McGonagall. Hogwarts. Luke, who had relied on the system to struggle and survive after transmigration many years ago, fell silent. Transmigrated and homeless at 6. Selling grilled skewers by the roadside at 7. Earning his first pot of gold through the system and sheer willpower at 8. Becoming Britain's youngest top chef at 9. Possessing numerous titles and wealth at 10. With the system's blessing, he was confident he could become Britain's unique and historically renowned god of cookery within a few years. He had struggled relentlessly and persistently for this goal. Yet, on his 11th birthday, a letter brought by an owl informed him that he had actually transmigrated into the world of Harry Potter. Of course, Luke quickly accepted reality. After all, since transmigration and a system existed, accepting that it was the world of Harry Potter wasn't so difficult. Moreover, magic, alchemy, magical creatures, and even immortality, which of these wasn't more exciting than his current life? Luke knew he couldn't refuse. His fingers gently rubbed the parchment as he muttered to himself, perhaps going to Hogwarts is a good choice too. Ding. Detecting change in host's intentions. Hogwarts acceptance letter detected. Host unveils a mysterious corner of the magic world. Magic Chef 2.0 system update complete. Currently, the host can redeem rewards by harvesting the emotional value of magical creatures through gourmet food. Rewards include, but are not limited to, spell learning speed, potion skills, transfiguration talent, alchemy experience. System panel updated. Host, Luke Graves. Culinary skills, extreme knife skills, extreme pastry techniques, great master blacksmithing techniques, ancestral master charm, great master grilling techniques, ultimate instant noodle guide, 97 ways to eat ham, wheel cheese pasta secret recipe, royal baked potato secret recipe, National Treasure Level Cake Baking Techniques, Winemaking Secret Recipe, High-Evil Cultivation Technique Quick Guide, The Wonderful Uses of 5-Kernel Mooncakes, 9,999 Golden Ideas for Dark Cuisine. Culinary Level, SS Quasi-God of Cookery. Magic Level, F comparable to a squib. Spell Level, F. Transfiguration Level, F. Potion Level, A-. Culinary Bonus. Alchemy Level, D. Blacksmith Bonus. Defense Level, E. Culinary Bonus. White Magic Level, F. Dark Arts Level, C. Culinary Bonus. Current long-term unfinished missions. Mission 1. The Path to Godhood. 5 jobs a day, the god of cookery is especially relaxed. Progress 99.3, 100. Reward. A set of legendary cooking utensils. Mission 2. All-night battle god. Continuously run a late-night snack stall at Hogwarts for 1 school year. Reward. 100% replication of 1 sacred artifact ability repeatable. Mission 3. Attended by many. Handmaiden Night Order current members activated, 0-200. Reward. Magic bonus. All personnel, be on alert. Luke didn't even have time to complain about the ability levels on the panel, which looked like they belonged to a student who only focused on one subject. He was instantly struck full-on by Shyvana's loud voice and her rapidly charging figure. This commotion is too exaggerated. Did an army break in? Luke shook his head inwardly. Given his current status as Britain's youngest and most talented top chef, and his shares and standing in numerous gourmet industries, he truly couldn't figure out who would want to antagonize him, a rising new noble. However, when his gaze fell back upon the acceptance letter, he was immediately stunned. Shyvana. Among the people you're stopping, is there a handsome old man with a waist-length white beard, a female professor who can turn into a cat, or maybe a big bat who doesn't wash his hair, or perhaps a short little person who isn't even as tall as your leg? Shyvana, startled, loosened her protective grip on Luke and asked, "Young master, do you really know them?" "They aren't assassins." Luke cursed inwardly, immediately rushing past Shyvana's blockade. Sure enough, outside the hall, 200 fully armed maids had completely surrounded Dumbledore and McGonagall. Seeing the incredibly ethereal crystal shield defense in front of the two of them. If Luke still couldn't guess their identities, he would truly be stupid enough. Luke stumbled for a moment. Oh dear. Folks, who understands this feeling? School is about to start, and the visiting teachers have arrived. Only for his own people to suddenly surround them like bad guys, issuing threats and immediately giving them a warning. Before school even started, he had practically offended the 2 most powerful figures at Hogwarts. If he couldn't salvage the situation, he'd probably be wearing tight shoes until graduation. Luke turned to look at the ready Shyvana and immediately shouted. Nonsense. Retreat immediately. This is the guiding professor from Hogwarts School of Magic, where I will be enrolling. Shyvana's eyes held 3 parts stubbornness, 3 parts confusion, 3 parts grievance, and 1 part disbelief. Young master, didn't you say that becoming the god of cookery was your lifelong dream? Are you not going to be the god of cookery anymore? Professor, we are truly sorry. A chorus of apologies rang out in unison. All the maids, including Shyvana, apologized simultaneously. Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall, accustomed to such commotion, repeatedly waved their hands, indicating it wasn't necessary. McGonagall was genuinely surprised. Accustomed to undisciplined young wizards whose answers were always a mess, she found this sudden display quite impactful. Luke wiped his hands, still wearing his apron, and placed 2 crystal glasses in front of Dumbledore and Professor McGonagall, respectively. Professors, this is my original dessert, the Hawthorn Sugar Snowball. I apologize once again for the commotion just now. A slight smile spread across Dumbledore's lips. He seemed completely unbothered by the previous incident and was clearly very interested in the Hawthorn Sugar Snowball. Luke finally let out a breath of relief. It made sense. No matter how many ordinary people there were, what threat could they pose to this evergreen figure of the wizarding world? Professor McGonagall glanced at Dumbledore, slightly speechless. Her teacher and colleague was excellent in every way, except that he couldn't walk past sweets without stopping. Professor McGonagall politely picked up a Hawthorn Sugar Snowball with her fork. The Hawthorn berry was crystal clear, clearly having been meticulously selected, while its exterior was covered in a layer of fine, snowy white, crunchy sugar coating. Purely based on presentation, it was truly impressive. McGonagall didn't like sweets, and even had an aversion to them because of Dumbledore. But adhering to the principle of politeness, Professor McGonagall gently placed a sugar snowball into her mouth. The dense, delicate sweetness mingled perfectly with the extreme sweet and sour flavor of the hawthorn. Not only was there no cloying sweetness, but she was instead stunned by the unique texture and the special liqueur sauce injected into the center of the hawthorn. The rich flavor instantly spread through her mouth, like a storm of taste buds. The exquisite taste made McGonagall momentarily distracted. When she came to her senses, she realized that her hand had unconsciously forked up another one. She looked at Luke with a slight embarrassment, then turned her head to look at Dumbledore. She found Dumbledore praising Luke with a look of utter enjoyment. Impeccable culinary skill, truly perfect. It is hard to imagine this coming from the hands of an 11-year-old young man. As impressive as your maids. Dumbledore, his eyes full of appreciation, raised his crystal glass and turned to McGonagall. I apologize, Mr. Luke Graves. There is another unusual young person I need to check on from afar. Thank you very much for your hospitality. We shall see you again at Hogwarts. Minerva, Mr. Graves's guidance will be completed by you. McGonagall nodded. As their eyes met, a voice only she could hear sounded in Professor McGonagall's ear. Although this child's magical capacity is quite ordinary, his displayed talent in the Muggle world is enough for us to take him seriously. Dumbledore smiled kindly at Luke, and warm, golden-red flames suddenly emanated from around him. The next moment, he vanished. Luke, meanwhile, was overjoyed. Because just now, the hawthorn sugar snowball he made had genuinely harvested its first batch of magical emotional value, filling him with the same novelty he felt when he was 6. The system prompt sounded in his mind. Congratulations, host. Hawthorn sugar snowball has harvested 800 positive emotional value from Dumbledore. Congratulations, host. You have harvested 200 positive emotional value from Minerva McGonagall. Magic Removal 2.0 store is now open. Currently, the host can exchange for the Elementary Transfiguration Talent. Elementary Transfiguration Talent, an enhancement type reward. Possessing this level of talent allows you to understand all transfiguration knowledge at 200% speed, and your comprehension of low-level transfiguration far exceeds the norm. Luke smacked his lips. This was a rare and valuable item. Based on his understanding of the system, a permanent reward like this definitely counted as a beginner's bonus. But when he looked at Shyvana, who was standing nearby, serious and persistent, he immediately clutched his forehead. Go on, what else do you want? Shyvana asked with a stubborn look. Young master, are you really going to study magic? Luke glared at Shyvana exasperatedly. Does being a culinary god interfere with studying magic? Shyvana fell silent, then looked up at Luke after a moment. Then can all of us go with you? It is our mission to look after the young master. Luke scanned the massive, imposing maid corps that Shyvana had single-handedly organized. He felt his head was twice its normal size. I'm going to school. Professor McGonagall savored the sugar snowball, looking at the empty space where even the crystal cup had been taken away, feeling a bit awkward. I believe the general situation of the wizarding world has been explained clearly. I wonder, Luke, do you have any other questions? If so, I would be happy to answer them. Your afternoon tea was quite delicious. Hogwarts always holds goodwill toward hardworking and kind young wizards. Luke smiled shyly, finally asking the question he was most concerned about. Professor, I wonder if I can set up a stall at Hogwarts. As you know, cooking is both my talent and my hobby. McGonagall's chewing instantly stopped. After a long pause, she looked at Luke with a scrutinizing gaze. Mr. Graves, I want you to know that studying in the wizarding world is not easy. Talent and effort are both essential. This business of setting up a stall will seriously impact your studies. I believe that with your culinary skill, there is no need to pursue such frivolous activities. Luke looked at Professor McGonagall opposite him and did not back down. So, as long as I maintain excellent academic performance, I can set up a stall, correct? Minerva McGonagall felt helpless. She didn't know what to say to this young wizard who was so obsessed with cooking. But adhering to her responsibility as a teacher, she said sternly. Unless you can master one volume of the complete basic spellbook every month. Otherwise, I absolutely will not agree to this. Mr. Luke, next I will guide you to your first stop in the wizarding world, Diagon Alley. Of course, you will need to provide some muggle currency, such as pounds sterling or gold. McGonagall glanced around the opulent manor and said to Luke, I imagine this shouldn't be a problem for you, should it? Luke immediately nodded. Shyvana instantly gave a command, and the maid corps, numbering a full 100, filed in. Everyone was carrying a silver briefcase. McGonagall was momentarily stunned. The briefcases opened, and a golden light shone forth. McGonagall nodded knowingly. Gold, just as she suspected. But when she saw so many briefcases, McGonagall was momentarily bewildered. Mr. Luke, I wanted to ask if all these briefcases contain gold. Luke nodded, showing a mouthful of white teeth. Not much, about a ton, I suppose. Professor McGonagall felt as though she had been hit by a stunning spell. How much? Luke scratched his head awkwardly. 1 ton. Can't the wizarding world exchange excess gold for galleons? McGonagall was speechless. Only now did she truly grasp the extent of Luke's wealth. Meanwhile, Shyvana ordered the maids to gather all the briefcases together, then bowed 90 degrees. Professor McGonagall, please ensure I accompany the young master on this journey. McGonagall nodded mechanically. With a flick of her fir-wood wand, the nearly 100 briefcases transformed into a string of maple leaf-shaped bookmarks that fell into Luke's hand. Apparate. Luke and Shyvana vanished, following the swirling motion as if they had been flushed down a toilet. The back door of the leaky cauldron. Next to the weathered brick wall was a not-so-new, not-so-old trash can. Unusually, there was no trash in the trash can. McGonagall, who had apparated, waited for Luke and Harry to recover from the after-effects of apparition sickness. Luke stared at the wall in front of him and took a deep breath. Is this the entrance to Diagon Alley? Finally, he was about to enter the magic world. He urgently needed to perform exceptionally well. Only then could he attract the attention of McGonagall, or even Dumbledore, and thus receive preferential treatment. After all, the magic world didn't care about Luke's status in the Muggle world. With the magical chef system, he needed to acquire magical abilities faster and better, which depended on harvesting emotional value through gourmet food. Without the ability to set up a stall at Hogwarts, the speed of gaining emotional value would be terribly slow. Moreover, there was a lucrative main quest, the sacred artifacts. Furthermore, upon entering the magic world, he also wanted to see if he could find something to enhance the abilities of the handmaidens, as the Handmaiden Knight Order's quest also seemed excellent. Also, Shyvana was not easy to fool. For this head maid, who meticulously focused on his daily life and diet, and for the handmaidens, he needed to buy more good things to appease them. After all, they were all family. McGonagall gently tapped a seemingly unique brick on the wall with her wand. The bricks on the wall came alive, transforming into precise alchemical machinery that reassembled into a shimmering silver archway with faint clicking sounds. The boisterous sounds and the bustling wizards wearing wizard hats made even Luke, who knew many plot points of the Harry Potter world, feel a sense of awe. Welcome to Diagon Alley. Here you can buy most items from the magic world. It's no exaggeration to call it the most prosperous commercial pedestrian street in the British magical community. Mr. Graves, I believe the first place we need to enter is Gringotts, in the center of the street. That is the bank managed by goblins, and all the money you need in the magic world will come from here. McGonagall meaningfully glanced at the string of maple leaf bookmarks in Luke's hand, signaling for the two to follow. Shyvana followed closely beside Luke, her eyes full of vigilance. However, she was also quickly and profoundly awestruck by the sight before her. She could only purse her lips, staring at everything around her. Is this the world young master is about to enter? Soon, the group arrived at Gringotts. The massive marble statues and grand architecture exuded an extremely powerful sense of oppression. Inside, the opulent decorations were filled with exotic charm and the allure of money. Walking through an open metal door carved with profound patterns, Luke and Shyvana finally reached the goblin's counter. Their eyes were filled with curiosity. Behind the tall mahogany counter, small goblins with long, pointed ears and shrewd eyes were bustling about, never stopping. Professor McGonagall then spoke to a goblin named Ragnick behind the counter. I've brought a young wizard to exchange galleons. Hearing McGonagall's words, the middle-aged goblin Ragnick opposite her looked up. Only 2 days, Professor McGonagall, and we meet again. You know the rules. The exchange rate for pounds to galleons is 5 to 1. This is only for young wizards, and they can only exchange 200 pounds per school year. However, there is no such restriction for gold. Luke clicked his tongue in wonder from the side. The goblins' eyes openly revealed expressions of greed. As rumored, goblins valued money above all else and had an overly obsessive preference for gold. Looking at the neatly arranged piles of coins on the counter, Luke couldn't help but curl his lip. 1 galleon could be exchanged for 17 sickles, and 1 sickle could be exchanged for 29 nuts. He wondered which genius came up with such a currency exchange rate. In short, it was beyond words. McGonagall stepped aside for Luke. The goblin Ragnick scanned the boy before him. Luke possessed a composure beyond that of other human young wizards his age. Then he looked at Shyvana, the handmaiden dressed in a maid's uniform beside him. A hint of expectation appeared in Ragnick's eyes. With a handmaiden accompanying him, Luke was clearly not one of those financially struggling young wizards. There was a high probability that he was very wealthy, perhaps even possessing gold. It was well known that exchanging Muggle currency for galleons was a losing business, but gold was solid hard currency. However, when his gaze swept around and he didn't see what he wanted, a hint of disappointment immediately appeared. No money, yet pretending to be rich, even bringing a handmaiden. Ragnick's enthusiasm instantly cooled, and he spoke to Luke with extreme arrogance. So, Mr. Graves, how much money do you wish to exchange here? Luke stared intently at the snobbish Ragnick before him, almost wanting to laugh out loud. This goblin's expression changed faster than a mask. Although he was ugly, he was thinking of money. Luke nonchalantly placed a leaf-shaped bookmark on the counter. Ragnick's eyes focused on the bookmark, noting clear traces of transfiguration. He couldn't help but look up. The next second. Bang tilde. The exquisite bookmark transformed into a silver briefcase. Ragnick looked at Luke in surprise, then turned to McGonagall. McGonagall Minerva, as the deputy principal of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, helping a young wizard who had just received his acceptance letter to store items using transfiguration was quite surprising. Had he misjudged him? Ragnick smoothly opened the briefcase. 10 gold bars were arranged inside, their dazzling golden brilliance making Ragnick's breath catch. 10 kilograms of gold. This was indeed a substantial achievement. Ragnick's breathing noticeably quickened, and his gaze towards Luke immediately became more fervent. Mr. Luke Graves, these are gold bars. Do you wish to exchange all of them for galleons? Luke nodded, and the goblin Ragnick was overjoyed. This single transaction alone would allow Ragnick to rest for several months. At this moment, Ragnick looked at Luke with an almost terrifyingly pleasant expression, his wrinkled face almost squeezed into a blooming chrysanthemum. However, when Luke saw the other party about to put away the gold bars in the briefcase, he immediately reached out to stop him. Ragnick was puzzled, his expression changing slightly. Mr. Graves, please rest assured, Gringotts is the safest bank in all of Britain. Did Luke really not want to part with this gold? Seeing Ragnick's expression, Luke no longer procrastinated, placing all the remaining bookmarks on the counter. Ragnick's eyes narrowed, then showed some disbelief. Mr. Graves, what do you mean by this? Luke pouted and said, since we're exchanging, let's exchange them all in one go. McGonagall, observing from a distance, couldn't help but purse her lips, her face devoid of any expression. The goblin Ragnick, however, looked at the bookmarks and asked, are all of these? Ragnick's voice suddenly became sharp. Luke nodded. Bang, bang, bang tilde. McGonagall cooperatively lifted all the transfiguration spells. 100 briefcases piled up on the goblin's counter. The sheer number was so conspicuous that all the goblins turned their heads to look. Under Ragnick's dumbfounded gaze. Boom. The entire mahogany counter suddenly collapsed, raising a huge cloud of dust. Cough, cough. Griphook brushed the dust off his body, filled with nothing but shock. The goblins were all panting heavily, and Griphook, ignoring his crushed counter, opened one briefcase after another with trembling fingers. Golden light shone into his eyes. Griphook's breathing grew heavier and heavier. It wasn't until a long moment later that he reacted, his long fingernails drawing strange patterns in the air. Then all the gold flew up and piled together. At this moment, he was uncharacteristically flustered. Mr. Luke Graves, do you want to exchange all this gold? Luke smiled faintly and said, Manager Griphook, I still hope you maintain that unruly demeanor you had just now. I want to exchange this ton of gold for coins. Clink, clank tilde. In the quiet surroundings, someone's coin dropped to the ground. Then came even heavier breathing. A ton of gold. The unit of wealth this young man used was terrifyingly measured in tons. Griphook, unable to control himself, took a long time to compose himself before bowing deeply to Luke with a trembling voice. Esteemed Mr. Luke Graves, you will become our most valued client at Gringotts. Luke waved his hand and asked, do you offer interest here? Griphook, the goblin, froze. Interest. There's no such thing in the wizarding world. Moreover, if a ton of gold exchanged for galleons were to incur interest, how much wealth would the goblins lose? But looking at the big patron Luke in front of him, Griphook still managed to force out a very difficult smile to express his apology. Seeing his reaction, Luke immediately laughed. He turned to Minerva McGonagall beside him. Professor, if I deposit my money at Hogwarts, wouldn't it be faster and more convenient? After all, if there's no interest, what's the difference between Gringotts and Hogwarts? Before McGonagall could reply, Griphook shot out from behind the counter, which had already returned to its original state. His eyes gleamed with urgency. Mr. Luke Graves, Gringotts is the safest bank in the entire wizarding world. Here, we have dragon guards and the service and management of the entire goblin race. There's no safer place than this. Seeing his urgency, Luke immediately laughed. Manager Griphook, Hogwarts should also be safe enough. Unless you can show enough sincerity, I have no reason to deposit my money here. A hint of struggle and hesitation appeared in Griphook's eyes. It wasn't until a long moment later that he gritted his teeth and, with a pained expression, said to Luke. If Mr. Luke Graves is willing to deposit this huge sum of money in my Gringotts, I am willing to give you one of my personal collectibles as interest on your deposit. Luke became interested, and even McGonagall beside him was surprised. This goblin was really going all out for this large sum of gold. Who doesn't know the greed of goblins? They always take in and never give out. The expression on their faces when exchanging Muggle currency for galleons was worse than if their father had died. Now, for the gold in Luke's hands, he was actually willing to, voluntarily, offer his own collection. One must know that besides managing Gringotts, goblins are also skilled in crafting alchemical items. In other words, you can question a goblin's loyalty, but never question a goblin's taste. And Griphook, as the manager of Gringotts Bank, probably had a lot of good things in his possession. Luke, this kid is really not one to suffer a loss. This time, he's probably going to make a killing. It wasn't until they walked out of Gringotts that McGonagall looked at Luke with a strange expression. The spellbook in Luke's hand, inlaid with magical patterns, was exceptionally eye-catching. She hadn't expected Luke to get such an alchemical item. This kid's eye for quality was truly sharp. As one of the few transfiguration masters in the British wizarding world, McGonagall couldn't help but feel a touch of envy when she looked at the spellbook. Alchemical items that can permanently fix transfiguration spells are too rare, not to mention that it was crafted by the goblin race. Judging by the magical fluctuations on it, it might even be an alchemical item personally enchanted by an extraordinary wizard whose power is close to Dumbledore's. It could be said that the value of this item would definitely make that goblin named Griphook lose sleep for several years out of heartache. Luke's expression was calm. And Shiva, beside him, was carrying a bag of gold coins, walking with a righteous air. McGonagall didn't know how to speak. After all, such a large bag of galleons was a bit too conspicuous. But she still held back her words. Luke, this fellow, still had no idea what kind of fright he would bring. For now, it was better for her to wait and see. And when the group arrived in front of a dilapidated, somewhat decaying shop, McGonagall immediately stopped. We are here to choose wands. As a wizard's most important companion and spell-casting equipment, this is a must-visit place. Luke looked up at the shop sign, Ollivander's Wand Shop, established 382 BC. Hey, good heavens, a history of 1 or 2,000 years. Quite something. Filled with anticipation, he followed them into the shop. An old man with messy hair but eyes sparkling with intelligence cast his gaze over. He nimbly climbed down from a tall ladder, looked at Professor McGonagall, and then at Luke. There was a hint of understanding in his eyes. Since Professor McGonagall is leading you, then you must be a new first-year wizard, correct? The wand chooses the wizard. Let's see which wand will choose you as its owner. As Ollivander spoke, an automatically working tape measure began to subtly measure Luke. The distance between his eyes, the distance between his nostrils, and even the width of his finger joints. After the measurements, Ollivander took out a slender, dusty-looking cardboard box. Try this one, unicorn hair core, fir wood. 10 3/4 inches long, slightly stiff. Luke reached out and took the wand, feeling a warm current within his body seemingly summoned, flowing into the wand. Bang! With an explosion, Ollivander's counter instantly had a sizable hole blown into it. Luke looked apologetically at Ollivander, who took the wand, waved his hand dismissively, and said, I told you, the wand chooses the wizard. It seems this one isn't for you. What about this one? Ollivander quickly pulled out another completely different walnut wand. Oh, no, no. It seems it's not this one. Trial after trial, Ollivander's eyes grew brighter and brighter. A picky customer, I'm getting more and more excited. McGonagall, standing by, was also filled with curiosity. She hadn't expected Luke, whom Dumbledore had assessed as having concerning magical reserves, to be so particular in his wand selection. It seemed Luke indeed possessed some extremely rare qualities. McGonagall casually waved her wand, and a silver sickle, flashing with silver light, was instantly transformed into a tall, long-legged stool. McGonagall sat down gracefully. And watching the busy Ollivander, who had already pulled out more than a dozen boxes, still searching for wands on the shelves. Luke's gaze involuntarily swept towards a very well-grown acacia tree next to the counter. What a peculiar fragrance. The black wood was faintly dotted with specks of gold, forming a unique pattern. Smelling the aroma, Luke couldn't help but reach out to touch it and observe carefully. The faint fragrance emanating from this special magical green plant made him realize that this acacia wood seemed like it could be used as an extremely unique spice. As the quasi-god of cookery, Luke immediately became interested. He secretly plucked a small section of leaf and began to chew it in his mouth. However, Ollivander, who had returned carrying a large pile of wands, instantly noticed this. Yet, when he saw Luke's actions, he wasn't angry at all. Instead, his eyes suddenly brightened. Acacia wood. That's right, why didn't I think of it? Gentle, persistent, yet extremely unique. The wand in Ollivander's hand immediately began to wave, and after a dazzling process of handling a fresh acacia wood branch, countless mysterious alchemical runes were infused, and the acacia wood branch had transformed into the rudimentary shape of a wand. Ollivander then carefully took out a bottle of liquid emanating a dense magical aura from a cabinet in the corner. The dazzling magical aura was mesmerizing, and the thick magical fluctuation made even Luke, who had not yet fully experienced magic, feel its extraordinary nature. McGonagall looked thoughtfully at Ollivander, softly uttering, dragon nerve. Good eye, but not accurate enough. This is an essence obtained only after over 1,000 years of processing. Ollivander muttered to himself, carefully solidifying the liquid inside the acacia wood. The countless alchemical techniques were dazzlingly complex and unimaginable. The 9 3/4 inch long wand slowly floated in the air. The magical fluctuations emanating from it filled Ollivander's eyes with excitement. It's done. This wand could absolutely be called the most satisfying one he had created in the past decade or so. Period. The wand hummed and flew directly into Luke's hand. Luke looked at the wand with light gold patterns in surprise, gave it a gentle wave, and immediately a warm current within his body was guided out, causing a warm red glow to appear in the surrounding air. These red lights slowly changed, transforming into one exquisite pastry after another, looking utterly mouthwatering. Ollivander clapped his hands in praise. Extremely delicate control of magic. It seems this wand has indeed met its most suitable master. McGonagall beside him was greatly surprised. Dumbledore had clearly evaluated Luke's total magical power as worrying. Yet, when choosing his wand, Luke displayed such unique characteristics. This meant that Luke possessed absolutely no shortage of excellent qualities. Inspired by a sudden flash of insight, Luke waved his wand again. The quill used for record-keeping instantly transformed into a palm-sized wooden long-legged stool, its shape identical to the one McGonagall herself had conjured through transfiguration. The only difference was probably in the color and texture. The moment Professor McGonagall turned her head, she saw Luke's unintentional spellcasting motion. The next moment, she sprang to her feet, abandoning all pretense of elegance. Her eyes stared directly at the miniature long-legged stool, revealing unconcealed astonishment. Transfiguration. A storm raged in her heart. The quantity of magical power can, to some extent, indirectly reflect a wizard's talent and growth potential. However, the magically weak Luke not only received high praise from Ollivander, but he also managed to cast the very transfiguration she had just used in the time it took her to turn around. One must know that as a great master of transfiguration, the technique she used was non-verbal spellcasting. The fact that Luke could imitate it under these circumstances showed how terrifying his talent for transfiguration was. McGonagall took a deep breath. She looked at Luke as if he were a little monster. She knew this matter had to be reported to Dumbledore. It was hard to imagine that Dumbledore and she could both be mistaken at the same time. Shyvana's eyes beside them were filled with joy. Sure enough, the young master was extraordinary, shining like a star wherever he went. Her squinted eyes looked exactly like a crescent moon. Looking at Luke's figure, she solidified a certain resolve. And after watching Luke and the others leave, Ollivander's eyes shimmered with excitement. A highly anticipated young wizard, and a marvelous wand-making combination. Luke seemed to have opened a door to a new world for him. Acacia wood could be paired like this. The wand-making technique he had unintentionally grasped just now had almost elevated his wand crafting to another level. Perhaps he could call this technique the Luke wand crafting method. Ollivander clapped his hands. What an unforgettable day. While Shyvana was instructed to purchase school equipment like the silver cauldron, brass telescope, and brass scale, Luke and a black-faced McGonagall walked out of Flourish and Blots, Luke clutching a stack of books as tall as he was. Next to Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions, despair flickered in McGonagall's eyes. Originally, when Luke showed great enthusiasm for magical books, she had been smiling warmly. She believed Luke was essentially a very studious young wizard, and combined with the qualities he had displayed, perhaps Hogwarts would welcome an outstanding and highly talented child. But who would have thought? In just a moment, Luke's style had become strangely eccentric. Besides the required textbooks, Luke also lavishly spent galleons buying 1,000 magical herbs and fungi, fantastic beasts and where to find them. By Newt Scamander, and many special potion recipes from the shopkeeper. Just as McGonagall was bewildered, Luke dove straight into the domestic magic book section, an area usually only frequented by wizard housewives. Basic kitchen charms, the wonders of scouring and shining. He then picked out a pile of cookbooks, finally emerging satisfied after the kitchen magic books. It could be said that 7/10 or more of that man-high stack of books had nothing to do with schoolwork. McGonagall belatedly had a premonition that the herbology and fantastic beasts knowledge Luke had chosen earlier probably also had other intentions behind it. Luke had plenty of money, and he bought so many official books without even blinking. Deciding that what she didn't see wouldn't hurt her, McGonagall said to Luke, "I also need to buy some personal items. You, Luke, will be responsible for purchasing your robes and I'll pet next. I will wait for you at the end of the street so we can leave together." Luke nodded. Without McGonagall following him, he felt somewhat relieved. As for showing off his talent, he believed he had already left a sufficiently deep impression on McGonagall back at Ollivander's shop. Regarding robes, Luke walked into Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions with great interest. A not bad, not good pastry smell wafted from the shop. Luke's highest evaluation was, "The craftsmanship is mediocre." Quite mediocre. Luke carefully stacked the books on the table by the door. He looked up at the famous robe shop, a flash of amazement in his eyes. Aside from the finished wizard robes and common wizard hats, the dazzling beauty of some of the garments astounded even Luke, who had been bombarded with information. It was only because Hogwarts required a uniform, not promoting an extravagant style, otherwise, a few of Madame Malkin's prized possessions could truly blind one. No wonder everyone dressed more brightly than each other at the Yule Ball. It turned out wizards also had an aesthetic sense. Of course, poor Ron Weasley was an exception. Inside the shop, bolts of fabric in various colors hung down from the ceiling beams. Besides the plain colors commonly used by wizards such as black, gray, silver, and white, there were also various iridescent colors, like a brilliant starry sky. Luke even saw the star and moon pattern fabric that Dumbledore once wore. And these fabrics seemed to have some special magic applied to them. Ever since obtaining the acacia wood wand from Ollivanders, Luke was finally able to feel faint magical fluctuations. Luke looked around. Madame Malkin walked out from inside with a smile, looking at Luke and saying, "You must be a young wizard newly admitted to Hogwarts, aren't you?" Luke nodded. Madame Malkin then skillfully waved her wand. 2 plain wizard robes, 1 everyday wizard hat, deerskin gloves for herbology class. In a matter of minutes, Luke had a pile of prepared clothes in front of him. Seeing that the items Madame Malkin produced were exactly as required by the admission letter, Luke immediately smiled and thanked her. Madame Malkin looked at Luke with a beaming smile. "Oh, what a handsome and polite young wizard. I'm making afternoon tea pastries. I wonder if you'd be interested in trying some." Luke saw Madame Malkin's high spirits and nodded. However, when he saw Madame Malkin waving her wand to make pastries, he slightly frowned. Madame Malkin noticed Luke's expression and asked, puzzled, "What's wrong? Is my afternoon tea not to your taste?" "I'm not boasting, but on Diagon Alley, my afternoon tea is as well regarded as the quality of my ready-made clothes." Luke shook his head. It seemed that as long as they were in Britain, even wizards hadn't eaten much good food. He immediately picked up a book from the top of the stack at the door and handed it to Madame Malkin. "Basic movement spells for pastry making, page 49 is the cooking method you are using. Although its content is generally not bad, there are significant differences in the proportions and techniques." Quote. "And in the Tao of cooking, a small difference can lead to a huge disparity. I believe the culinary content taught in this magic book is highly debatable." Madame Malkin was momentarily stunned. Looking at Luke, who was only 11 years old but spoke so eloquently, she was surprised, but then she smiled and asked. "Then, Mr. Luke Graves, what do you think is wrong with the making of this pastry?" Although her words held a hint of teasing, Luke glanced at the pastries still being automatically kneaded and baked, and actively took over the magically controlled kitchen utensils. An aura belonging to a quasi-god of cookery completely emanated from him. His nimble hands were even more dazzling than magic, and one exquisite pastry after another was created. Under the baking of the magic oven, an enticing aroma wafted out. Madame Malkin looked at Luke with extreme surprise, taking a deep breath. "Oh, what a wonderful smell. This is what a true afternoon tea pastry should be." Luke's eyes sparkled with seriousness and meticulousness. The moment the entire pastry was completely formed, he carefully took out an acacia wood leaf, which he had picked from Ollivander's shop, from the middle of a book. He quickly washed it, then, under simple salting and sugaring, he cut it into imperceptibly fine threads and sprinkled them over the pastry. A richer and more peculiar aroma then emanated. Luke wiped his hands and looked at Madame Malkin. "All right, the pastry should be quite good now. These acacia wood leaves can indeed be used as a spice." Luke was extremely satisfied with his sudden inspiration. Madame Malkin, standing by, completely swallowed her saliva. "A captivating aroma. Can you tell me how this was done?" Luke very generously wrote down the craft process and ingredients on a piece of paper. Madame Malkin held the recipe as if it were a treasure, joy flashing in her eyes. "Honestly, I've never seen a young wizard with such unique culinary skills. You are truly surprising." Madame Malkin, who had tasted a bite of the pastry, narrowed her eyes completely. And in Luke's mind, a voice rang out. Ding! Detected host's improvement of afternoon tea pastries harvesting Madame Malkin's positive emotional value of 100. Ding! Detected host's improvement of pastries harvesting Madame Malkin's positive emotional value of 66. Luke couldn't help but look up at Madame Malkin, who was enjoying herself immensely, and was secretly pleased. He rarely saw such a scene where emotional value could be harvested twice in a short period. It seemed Madame Malkin was indeed exceptionally satisfied with the pastry. As for the amount of magic emotional value, Luke also had a rough guess. It was probably that the amount of emotional value generated depended on the wizard's own ability. Just like Dumbledore, simply generating emotions casually could harvest hundreds of emotional value. And for someone like Madame Malkin, even if she was extremely satisfied, generating 100 emotional value was almost reaching the maximum state. Madame Malkin's eyes were filled with joy, and when she looked at Luke again, they were full of admiration. Mr. Luke, you shall have my sincerest friendship. This gift is too wonderful, I don't even know how to repay you. I will provide your wizard robes for the next 7 school years free of charge. Please, Luke, do not refuse. Luke smiled at Madame Malkin, filled with respect for this warm and generous woman. However, he waved his hand and said, "Thank you for your generosity, but I would also like to order some clothes for my family. After all, it's rare to see a clothing store with so many high-quality fabrics." Madame Malkin's eyes sparkled with understanding, and she said to Luke, "Of course, if you wish to order clothes for your family, I can still give them a set as a token of my gratitude." Seeing Madame Malkin's seemingly unconcerned demeanor, Luke shook his head and smiled at Madame Malkin. "Thank you for your generosity, but I think that quantity might be more than you can afford." Madame Malkin paused, looking at Luke. "Do you think I can't afford to give away these few items of clothing?" Her tone became a little displeased. Luke, however, gently waved his hand and said, 2 or 3 items for each person, plus I want to order several sets of clothes and aprons for myself. That adds up to nearly 1,000 sets. Madam, are you sure you want to give them to me?" Madame Malkin's hand trembled, and the pastry almost fell from her hand. She had never imagined a young wizard ordering 1,000 sets of robes right off the bat. This order was equivalent to more than half a year of her business. Madame Malkin looked slightly awkward, while Luke genuinely pulled out a large bag of galleons. The galleons gleamed brightly, causing Madame Malkin to stare blankly. "Do you truly intend to order this many robes?" Luke nodded, smiling somewhat shyly. "After all, I have quite a few maids at my home, and since I am about to start school, I should give them a decent gift." Luke smiled widely, thinking of the maids training diligently at the manor. Madame Malkin's smile instantly became radiant. Looking at Luke, who was wise, wealthy, handsome, and filled with cooking skills, she could not help but smile. "I did not expect to be the one gaining the advantage again, such a massive order truly represents a considerable income." Madame Malkin, having accepted the galleons, was now smiling even more brightly. An order for 1,000 sets was enough to keep her busy for several months. Madame Malkin now looked at Luke with increasing amiability. Just then, a boy with platinum blonde hair and a slightly pale complexion walked in and immediately addressed Madame Malkin. "Madame Malkin, my father has agreed to my request. I would like to add 2 more sets of robes, the slightly fancier kind. As for the bill, please charge it to Malfoy Manor. A house elf will come at the end of the month to settle the account." Madame Malkin turned her head to look. The platinum-haired boy exuded the haughtiness common among nobility. But Madame Malkin, who had just accepted a massive order from Luke, found herself completely uninterested in just 2 sets of robes. "Oh, it is Mr. Draco Malfoy. As a newly enrolled young wizard, the robes you ordered earlier should already be sufficient. If you wish to place an additional order, it will likely have to be scheduled several months from now." Draco Malfoy's expression immediately froze, and he looked at her incredulously. "Madame Malkin, I am only adding 2 sets to my order. How could that possibly take several months? Does the honor of the House of Malfoy not allow you to prioritize my order?" Madame Malkin expressed her regret. Seeing Luke about to leave, Madame Malkin thoughtfully packaged the clothing and simultaneously said to Luke, "The items you require will be delivered to you successively via owl. Also, please feel free to visit my little shop when you have time. I would be delighted to invite you for afternoon tea." Luke nodded, preparing to leave. Malfoy, seeing Madame Malkin actively and enthusiastically packaging many wizard robes and other clothes for Luke, immediately grew annoyed. "Madame Malkin, what is the meaning of this? We are both customers, so why can he get his clothes immediately while my order for 2 sets has to wait several months?" Facing Malfoy's insistent questioning, Madame Malkin simply replied flatly, "Mr. Luke Graves is a major client of my shop, and naturally enjoys priority." Malfoy immediately became exasperated upon hearing this. Looking at Luke, who was about the same age as him, a hint of astonishment flashed in his eyes. The Malfoy family's financial power has always been top-notch. Who is this unknown fellow? Among the established wizard families in the wizarding world, which one was unknown to the Malfoy family? He was certain he had never seen this fellow before. Aside from being somewhat handsome, he had no other outstanding qualities. Furthermore, he, Draco, absolutely could not accept being surpassed by someone else in terms of wealth and priority. He believed that even his father, Lucius Malfoy, would certainly support such an action. Malfoy, feeling somewhat rash, immediately said to Madame Malkin, "Then I will order 10 more sets." Even so, Madame Malkin seemed unmoved. Malfoy gritted his teeth and said, "Give my father and mother 10 sets each." He was haughty now, totaling over 30 sets. Even that would require a bag full of galleons. The profit brought by his order was extremely substantial. He refused to believe Madame Malkin would not be tempted. However, Madame Malkin acted as if she had not heard him, still enthusiastically seeing Luke out the door. Malfoy felt somewhat embarrassed, then looked at Madame Malkin with a strained expression. Does this level of sincerity still not allow me to jump the queue? Nobody turns down galleons. Madame Malkin merely shook her head. I am very sorry, but I truly accepted a massive order from Mr. Luke Graves. Draco Malfoy's expression was one of humiliation. But I ordered over 30 sets. Madame Malkin spread her hands, pointed at the robes and fabric in the shop, and said to Malfoy. Aside from the orders I already promised Hogwarts regarding you young wizards, the remaining materials have almost all been bought up by Mr. Luke Graves. An order of nearly 1,000 sets is enough to keep me busy for several months, so please try to understand. Malfoy instantly turned pale. At this moment, he no longer had the desire to order more robes, with 1,000 sets echoing in his mind, making his expression look strange. Immediately, he left Madame Malkin's shop without looking back. The shock of over 1,000 sets of robes was simply too great for Draco Malfoy. What kind of person could afford to order such a vast quantity of robes? Even Hogwarts would not typically place such a large order. At this moment, Draco Malfoy felt interested in Luke Graves for the first time, yet also felt an inexplicable repulsion. As the young master of the House of Malfoy, this was the first time he had ever felt hatred towards someone purely because of wealth. Having left Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions, Malfoy looked around. Seeing Luke walk into the somewhat cramped owl and pet shop ahead, the competitive boy immediately gritted his teeth and followed him in. He wanted to see if Luke was truly that wealthy. Inside the owl shop, Luke's gaze was somewhat strange. While placing his books down, the package next to them suddenly caught his attention. A cauldron, a scale, a brass telescope, plus 2 short swords of different lengths next to them. Luke began to turn and scan the area. It was filled with owls and other pets. The shop owner was dozing, but aside from a few scattered young wizards browsing the pet shop, he did not see Shyvana. Luke was confused and started looking around. The peculiar scent was somewhat pungent. There were turmeric-colored ugly cats, toads blowing bubbles, and even various rats of different sizes. But the most numerous were probably the owls hanging throughout the whole room. Luke looked around. Regarding the most famous messenger in the wizarding world, Luke was very interested in owls. After all, only owls, which inherently possess beacon magic, can accurately deliver mail across vast distances in the magic world. However, when his gaze fell upon a miniature owl no bigger than a fist, he immediately stopped. The owl had 2 cowlicks, one red and one blue, sticking up from its head, and its round eyes stared straight at him, looking exactly like a small figurine. Luke felt a sense of closeness, and reached out to poke it. The next moment, bang tilde. This extremely small owl actually transformed into Shyvana amidst a hazy smoke. Shyvana's eyes were full of smiles. Young master, are you surprised? Is this unexpected? Luke was immediately bewildered. So he had immediately taken a fancy to his own head made in the owl shop. But how could Shyvana turn into an owl? Did Shyvana also accidentally undergo an awakening of magic? However, this scene was coincidentally witnessed by Draco Malfoy, who had followed him. Draco's expression instantly looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He looked at Shyvana with a face full of disbelief and shock. His small heart was filled with massive shock. And when he saw Shyvana throwing herself into Luke's arms and grabbing hold of him, Draco Malfoy's expression completely froze. He found it somewhat unbelievable. His father had never allowed him to keep pets, saying that nobles should possess a noble temperament and elegance. Yet, the first time in his life he entered a pet shop, he witnessed a scene he would never forget. So, there were owls that could transform into mature beauties. Indeed, the wizarding world ran deep. Although he was the young master of the House of Malfoy, his knowledge was perhaps still insufficient. It was just that he felt a little jealous. How was it that this fellow named Luke seemed to get involved in everything? Having already been slighted earlier at Madame Malkin's robes for all occasions, seeing Luke acquire such a distinct owl made him momentarily feel quite jealous. At this moment, the system prompt sounded again in Luke's mind. Ding! Long-term quest 4 issued. Help Shyvana enhance the extremely thin ice and fire dragon bloodline within her. Reward. Dual animagus form. Ding! Quest 3. Surrounded by followers. Handmaiden Knight Order current members activated 1/200th. Reward. Overall magic power bonus x1. Luke was slightly delighted. It turned out that Shyvana was full of such surprises. With Shyvana around, Luke felt he didn't really need any other pets now. After all, who could compare to his thoughtful and reliable head maid? Just as the two were about to leave, Draco Malfoy rushed up, looked at Shyvana with great curiosity, and then smiled at Luke, saying, "Hello, my name is Draco Malfoy, the heir of the House of Malfoy." As a member of the sacred 28 families, Draco showed a hint of pride in his eyes. Looking at Luke, he immediately said, "I am very fond of your special owl. If you transfer ownership of it to me, I can completely accept a 20% markup. And by transferring this owl to me, you will gain the most cherished friendship of the House of Malfoy." Draco was full of confidence at the moment, his eyes filled with admiration for Shyvana. He had already planned how he would show off this owl, believing that such a unique owl was an extremely rare existence in the entire wizarding world. Being able to transform into a human incarnation was probably no worse than an animagus, which involved a human transforming into an animal. At this moment, Draco seemed to be able to imagine the scene of others gasping in envy. Thinking of the few house elves at his home, he immediately curled his lip. In comparison, he felt that the house elves at home were nothing special. Why hadn't father helped the family find such a rare breed of owl before? Was he afraid he would become arrogant? Only an owl like Shyvana could be worthy of his status as a young master. Luke glanced at this spoiled young master, Draco Malfoy, and immediately curled his lip. He knew a little about Draco. Aside from being a bit arrogant, he wasn't entirely bad overall. Luke naturally had some plans regarding him. But now, it seemed the other party's brain wasn't working too well. How was this an owl? She was clearly his maid. Of course, perhaps the scene of the owl transforming just now was too shocking, leading Malfoy to some strange misunderstandings. Luke was about to say something, but Shyvana turned her head and spoke to Luke. "Young master, this person is crazy, ignore him, let's go." Then, like a warrior, she shouldered Luke's large stack of books and packages, and strode out ahead. Luke waved his hand apologetically and walked straight out. What was there to say to Malfoy? He was just a stubborn child. Whether to bother with him depended on Luke's mood. The most important thing right now was to go home and study the alchemy grimoire and magic books, as well as Shyvana's peculiarities. He also wondered how exactly his head maid had transformed. Did her clothes transform along with her? How exactly was the Handmaiden Knight Order activated? Did each member need a horse or a carriage to count as a knight? Malfoy behind him was so angry his vision blurred, and only after he regained clarity did he look furiously at Luke's retreating figure. "Luke Graves, I'll remember you." Then, unwilling to give up, he turned to the dozing pet shop owner and banged on the table, startling him awake. "Owner, I want an owl too." The pet shop owner wiped away his drool, stood up, and introduced. "We have the widest variety of owls here. You can choose whatever you like." Draco looked expectantly at the pet shop owner beside him. "Owner, I want an owl that can transform into a maid, just like the one just now. Preferably, one that is even prettier than her. Also, everyone in the House of Malfoy has platinum blonde hair." If you have an owl that can transform to have long platinum blonde hair, I'm willing to pay extra. The pet shop owner was slightly bewildered. He patted his forehead and stood up. Accidentally, he stepped on a rather ugly ginger cat. An unpleasant shriek immediately rang out. The owner carelessly pushed the cage aside, then looked at Malfoy and forced a smile, saying, "Young Master Draco, I didn't quite catch what you said." He naturally knew the House of Malfoy. Seeing the young master of the House of Malfoy come to him to buy a pet, he was naturally full of anticipation. He could understand every single word Draco said. But strung together, the words were truly baffling. "We have many owls here. But he certainly didn't have maids here. And what in the world was an owl that could transform?" The pet shop owner had been running his shop for most of his life and had never heard of such a novelty. He awkwardly rubbed his hands and said to Draco, "Young Master Malfoy, I believe you must be referring to an animagus, one who can transform into an animal form." Draco shook his head. "I just saw it with my own eyes. In your shop, a snowy owl transformed into the appearance of a maid." The pet shop owner's face darkened. He personally counted his pets again, and only breathed a sigh of relief when he confirmed none were missing. Could it be that the young master of the House of Malfoy had gone soft in the head? How could there be such an owl? If there was, he would want one too. But seeing Draco babbling incessantly and looking so unusually expectant, the pet shop owner could only shake his head speechlessly. "I'm sorry, Mr. Draco Malfoy, we really don't have that in our shop." Draco was somewhat furious, "But you definitely do have it in your shop." After a round of arguments, the young Malfoy's face flushed red. As the only heir of the House of Malfoy, this was the first time he had been repeatedly slighted like this. As he walked out, he turned around and saw Lucius Malfoy and his mother, Narcissa. A wave of bitterness rushed into his heart. "Mother, I want an owl that can turn into a maid, but this awful pet shop owner just won't sell it to me." Lucius paused, surprised, and looked at Malfoy. "Child, do you want to listen to what you are saying?" However, Draco said with an angry expression. "Why can others buy so many clothes while we have to wait? Why could he choose an owl that transforms into a maid, but I couldn't? Father, aren't we the House of Malfoy? Aren't we the elite among the sacred 28 families? Are we unable to afford it? Are we going bankrupt?" Draco even developed a slight fissure of doubt regarding the honor of the House of Malfoy. Lucius gritted his teeth and looked at Draco Malfoy. "Is this about money?" At this moment, Lucius Malfoy even suspected that Draco had been subjected to a body-separating curse by some hidden dark wizard, otherwise how could he speak such nonsense? He nervously glanced around, confirming he didn't sense the aura or summons of dark arts, and only then did he pull Draco, intending to leave. However, Draco stubbornly insisted. "Father, I don't care, I just want a maid owl that can transform into a beautiful mature beauty." Lucius sighed. "Go back to your study and clear your head. You are not allowed to come out until school starts. Oh, and one more thing." Lucius Malfoy suddenly said. "You absolutely must not touch the notebook on the highest shelf or the Daily Prophet box." Draco, swear it. Graves Manor. After promising Professor McGonagall to study hard and not waste his magical talent, Luke finally had time to sort out what he had gained in the past 2 days. From an ordinary quasi-god of cookery pursuing the peak of culinary arts to a new student at Hogwarts, Luke was filled with mixed emotions. Sure enough, the magic world was indeed much more interesting than the ordinary world. And with the blessing of magic, it seemed his culinary skills had another chance to reach a new height. Whether it was techniques and skills, or some unimaginable ingredients, they might all be utilized. At this moment, Luke finally realized why his quasi-god of cookery quest was stuck at 99.3%. Perhaps 99.3% was already the peak of culinary arts in the entire Muggle world of Britain. After all, being in the culinary desert of Britain, Luke didn't think becoming a quasi-god of cookery was a difficult task. Categorizing his wizard's robes and books, Luke lightly waved his wand. Wingardium Leviosa. Luke, who had learned the levitation charm, floated the snowy owl perched on his shoulder. Luke said somewhat speechlessly. "Shyvana, you don't have to watch so closely. There's still a little while until school starts." Shyvana snorted coldly. "Young master, I'm definitely going to school with you, don't think about shaking me off." The speechless Luke could only shrug and continue flipping through the books. In fact, his thoughts had already drifted to the system. The system panel popped up. Host: Luke Graves. Culinary skill: Culinary level, SS. Magic level, E. Spell level, E. Transfiguration level, D. Potion level, A-. Culinary bonus. Alchemy level, D. Blacksmith bonus. Defense against the dark arts level, E. Culinary bonus. White magic level, F. Dark arts level, C. Culinary bonus. Currently unfinished long-term quests. Quest 1. The Path to Godhood. 5 jobs a day, a quasi-god of cookery is so relaxed. Progress 99.3, 100 reward. A set of legendary kitchen utensils. Quest 2. All-Night Warrior. Continuously set up a stall selling late-night snacks at Hogwarts for 1 academic year, can obtain 100% replication of one of the sacred artifacts, abilities repeatable. Quest 3. Surrounded by attendants. Handmaiden Night Order current members activated, 1/200th reward. Magic bonus x1. Quest 4. Dragon Guardian. Help Shyvana enhance the extremely thin ancient ice-fire dragon bloodline within her. Reward: dual animagus form. Luke, after reading the system panel, was somewhat surprised. His magic and spell levels had unexpectedly and rarely increased by 1 rank. From his original F level, which was not much better than a squib, it directly rose to the normal E level. And the ability to increase his magic was clearly due to the unexpected activation of a Handmaiden Night Order member for Quest 3. Luke's gaze involuntarily turned to Shyvana. If anyone could meet this requirement, it was undoubtedly Shyvana. Although Luke hadn't yet figured out the specific requirements for activating this quest, the effect it produced after activation was genuinely exaggerated. 1 member could double the bonus, so 200. Luke, putting away his fantasies, focused on the newly appeared quest, and immediately showed a, just as expected, expression. It seemed there was a reason for Shyvana's extraordinary combat power. The red and blue light emanating from her was a magical fluctuation of ancient dragon magic. Shyvana, imbued with a trace of ice-fire dragon bloodline power, had boundless prospects. The reward for helping Shyvana's awakening was exceptionally generous. At the same time, the reward for completing the quest, the dual animagus form, also meant that there was 1 more form she could transform into. Based on his understanding of the system, it was very likely that the transformation forms also included magical creatures from the forbidden domain of transfiguration. At this moment, Luke was full of anticipation for his upcoming Hogwarts journey. Because the route of achieving all this required Luke to harvest enough emotional value with his cuisine. Therefore, the first step of building a skyscraper was to set up a stall. Luke weighed the alchemy grimoire he had earned from Ragnik the Goblin at Gringotts. Under the infusion of magic, countless tiny square crystals on the book continuously proliferated and grew, then instantly unfolded into a small stall with a signboard and magical gas lamps. As for pots, pans, and bowls, they were effortlessly conjured with a thought. Then the stall rapidly shrunk, constantly changing into crystal cups, suitcases, and silver longswords. Luke, seeing his magic rapidly depleting and almost at rock bottom, finally put away his playful thoughts. Overall, this alchemy grimoire was definitely a huge profit. However, although the problem of the stall was completely solved, to set up a stall long-term, Professor McGonagall, the deputy principal, was an unavoidable hurdle. If he got detention for setting up a stall, would he, a quasi-god of cookery, still have any face? Opportunities for detention like that should be left to Harry's trio. As long as he learned 1 volume of a compendium of basic spells every month, Professor McGonagall wouldn't be able to say anything, even if she was displeased. Looking at the more than a dozen volumes of a compendium of basic spells, Luke immediately showed a wry smile. Without emotional value as a foundation, this would be an almost impossible task. Even if Merlin were reborn, he wouldn't be that amazing. After all, even if it was just a thin volume, the spells inside were absolutely unimaginably difficult. Most excellent young wizards were already incredibly impressive if they could master half of the spells each academic year. To learn 1 volume every month, the difficulty was self-evident. Luke tried to exchange emotional value for spell comprehension speed, and his eyes immediately lit up, but then quickly dimmed. The happy part was that with the magic bonus, learning magic was incredibly fast, and his mind and internal magic were like they had taken a stimulant. The sad part was that the consumption of emotional value was also truly fast. The emotional value he had painstakingly harvested at Madame Malkin's even lasted less than 3 seconds before it was completely burned out. Of course, what he gained in return was a proficient mastery of the levitation charm. And at this moment, without the bonus, he found reading culinary books from the magic world still quite easy, but the speed at which he read magic books was somewhat concerning. Shyvana, who had transformed back into human form, stood silently biting her lip nearby. Like a statue. Luke scratched his hair, feeling his learning speed was as slow as a paramecium crawling. That feeling was very much like being used to flying in high-speed trains, but being forced to accept a global tour by ox cart. That truly wouldn't work at all. At this moment, Luke was already impatient to go to Hogwarts to wreak havoc with his cuisine and harvest the emotional value of magical creatures. After all, in terms of the density of the source of magic, where could surpass Hogwarts School? Professors, students, and magical creatures, all were available. He was really looking forward to the start of school. Luke, closing his book again, began to fantasize once more. Tilting his head, he asked, Shyvana, tell me, which of the sacred artifacts should I choose? If I choose the ability of Death's invisibility cloak, shouldn't I do something exciting first to get used to it? If it's the Elder Wand. What if Dumbledore realizes that my abilities are as excellent as the Elder Wand? He wouldn't want to dissect me, would he? Successfully passing through platform 9 3/4. Luke arrived at the docking area for the Hogwarts Express at King's Cross Station. The atmosphere here was completely different from the station outside. Luke, who had arrived early, carefully examined this alchemical creation that connected the magic world and the Muggle world. The black and red train looked somewhat mysterious and magnificent. After carefully observing the old steam train, Luke was certain that although it was indeed steam-powered, it seemed to have an imperceptible layer of magic aura attached to it. He could be sure. Its internal design was definitely not as simple as its exterior suggested. He walked into the rearmost carriage of the train and set down his luggage. Shyvana, who had been perched on his shoulder as an owl, instantly transformed into her human form and nimbly helped Luke tidy his belongings, lifting the trunk onto the luggage rack. Shyvana then stuck out her tongue and transformed back into an owl. She settled on Luke's shoulder. Luke, meanwhile, was diligently flipping through a magic book. It had taken him a full month of effort, but Luke finally managed to learn a new magic through his own understanding, Lumos. After thoroughly mastering the abilities of Lumos and its upgraded version, Super Lumos, Luke couldn't help but rub his brow. The techniques of magic application and the traces of magical flow produced completely different effects across various spells. When magic was combined with incantations and gestures, it formed a specific magical circuit, which was necessary to successfully cast the desired magical effect. Although Luke had gained a deeper understanding of this phenomenon, the learning speed, however, was as slow as a tortoise crawling, making it quite difficult for him to accept. He placed a compendium of basic spells back onto the stack of books beside him. He pulled out a new notebook. The notebook contained some cooking recipes he had previously recorded. It was at this moment that the compartment door slid open. Seeing Luke sitting inside reading a book, a small boy with black hair and glasses asked slightly apologetically. Excuse me, can we sit here? As the boy's voice fell, a red-haired, freckled boy behind him clumsily squeezed half his body through the doorway. Hello, can I sit here too? It looks like most of the other places are full. Luke was momentarily stunned when he saw the two, then smiled faintly. Of course, you can. The two boys sat down, excitement in their eyes. The red-haired boy patted the black-haired boy's shoulder and exclaimed, I didn't expect the Hogwarts Express to look so surprisingly nice inside. The black-haired boy next to him managed a smile. Then, the red-haired boy spoke. Hello, I am Ron Weasley, a newly enrolled young wizard. After speaking, he turned his gaze to the black-haired boy beside him and asked. I haven't had a chance to ask until now, what is your name? The black-haired boy hesitated slightly, then replied. Hello, I am Harry Potter. Potter. Ron's voice suddenly increased by several decibels. Are you the boy who lived? Do you really have that lightning-shaped scar on your head? Since entering the magic world, Harry Potter had been subjected to curious stares at his forehead more than once. Hearing Ron's exaggerated question now, he felt a bit awkward, but still lifted his fringe. The lightning-shaped scar appeared before the two boys. Ron immediately covered his mouth and exclaimed, "That's incredible. You are amazing." Ron kept muttering to himself, while Harry Potter had already turned his attention to Luke opposite him. After all, when Luke sat there, he exuded a faint aura of maturity that did not belong to his age group. Seeing Harry's demeanor, Ron immediately turned to look at Luke and asked, "What about you? What is your name?" Luke smiled slightly. "Hello, I am also a newly enrolled young wizard. My name is Luke Graves." Ron extended his hand. "Then we are good friends. Please take care of me in the future." Luke nodded, offering a slight response. However, just then, a knock came at the compartment door again. "Excuse me, is there any room left?" When she saw three boys already seated in the compartment, the little witch's face immediately flushed slightly. Her chestnut hair was slightly wild, messy, yet voluminous and fell in large waves. The girl's expression was slightly awkward. "So many compartments are full, so I only just got around to asking here." She had thought that since this was near the end of the carriage, it would be empty, but she hadn't expected it to be full. Luke looked at her, thinking to himself that his luck was truly heaven-defying. He had casually picked a compartment and managed to assemble the entire protagonist group. This girl looked not just similar to Hermione Granger from the films, but exactly the same. Luke said, "Please come in." Hermione then walked in and sat next to Luke. "Hello, I am Hermione Granger." Harry and Ron introduced themselves in turn. When Hermione heard the name, Harry Potter, even she was slightly surprised. However, Ron was currently chattering away to Harry about interesting things in the wizard world. Hermione, finding the noise and chatter a bit boring, felt a sudden surge of goodwill when she saw Luke quietly flipping through his books. "Excuse me, could I borrow your book to look at?" Hermione's gaze fell upon Luke's book. Luke gestured for her to open any book she wished. When she saw the pages filled with dense lists of ingredients, magic techniques, and even movement spells related to kitchen magic, she was stunned. "Who am I? Where am I?" She had never heard that first-year young wizards had to study this. Could she have remembered incorrectly? But these books were definitely not on the required textbook list. Hermione had always considered herself gifted and extremely hardworking in her studies. She had even bought many books outside of the first-year curriculum to broaden her knowledge of the magic world. But she never expected someone's scope of study to be so vast. She awkwardly returned the book to its original place, and when she looked at Luke again, her expression was tinged with curiosity. Immediately, she picked up another magic book, but this time she pulled out 1000 Basic Herbs. Hermione was surprised. Isn't this a reference book used only by upper-year students?" She hadn't expected a young wizard to research herbology to such a depth. She couldn't help but wonder, Luke, can he really understand this? Yet, seeing Luke calmly flipping through the book page by page, Hermione felt a little ashamed. Finally, she picked up Fantastic Beasts and Where to Find Them. Only then did she finally breathe a sigh of relief. At least she had some knowledge of this book. Otherwise, she would truly have to question whether she had ever studied diligently. However, just then, the door was knocked upon again. Hermione was surprised. The compartment was full. Everyone simultaneously turned their gaze toward the door. They saw a round-faced, chubby boy standing there nervously and miserably, asking softly, "Excuse me, have you seen my Trevor?" Following Neville's explanation, everyone finally understood that the so-called Trevor was a toad no different from other pets. However, Neville had no idea where the toad had been lost, or even when it had been lost. His memory was truly terrible. Seeing Neville hesitate so much, Ron and Harry beside him immediately felt compelled to act. They wanted to help Neville, but trying to find a single toad in such a long train was like searching for a needle in a haystack. Hermione's eyes sparkled as she spoke to Neville. "What does your toad look like? Or do you know Accio? If you know its appearance, you can describe it accurately to others. And if you know Accio, you can accurately summon your Trevor. After all, even if someone else knows this spell, they can't accurately connect it to your pet." Neville Longbottom's face immediately flushed crimson. I actually don't know Accio. Gran taught me, but I just couldn't learn it. Then he spoke, even more embarrassed. As for Trevor, he's just a somewhat plump, warty toad. Hermione beside him instantly wanted to slap her forehead. Neville was simply too unreliable. If he couldn't even describe its shape, how were they supposed to help him find it? Luke, watching Neville's distressed expression, suddenly became interested. This was the future Gryffindor Sword Saint. Sure enough, that dullness didn't seem feigned at all. Zero confidence, coupled with a poor memory. He probably developed a personality that feared everything due to his grandmother's strict demands that he succeed. Furthermore, his mother was injured while fighting a Death Eater before he was born, so perhaps the issue of memory truly couldn't be blamed on Neville. Luke felt goodwill toward this future Sword Saint, so he spoke to the anxious Neville. I think your Trevor will come back on his own. After all, once we get off the train, the staff will clean every carriage one by one, and your toad will come out then. If you really miss him, I can help you temporarily. With that, Luke drew out his wand. With a gentle wave, the teacup on the table immediately transformed into the likeness of a toad, lifelike. The toad shimmered with a glazed color. Although it looks incredibly beautiful, it doesn't move. Luke smiled. Currently, I only know low-level transfiguration, which converts one object into another. I can't transform living things yet. If you really feel like you need something in your hands, you can have this for now. Neville awkwardly accepted the toad Luke had transfigured, quickly offering his thanks. Thank you. Thank you. It looks so much like Trevor. The cool, smooth feel made Neville think that perhaps having a toy like this in his hand wouldn't be bad in the future. At least one thing was better than Trevor: it wouldn't run around or get lost somewhere and cause worry. Seeing Neville leave, completely satisfied, Hermione beside him stared wide-eyed. Why, you actually know transfiguration? You have to know, this was something that could only be slowly attempted under the personal guidance of a professor. Luke's talent was too incredible. Hermione was filled with astonishment, because she had self-studied a lot at home and had also learned a few extremely basic spells. But she truly hadn't expected a young wizard to reach this level right at the start of the school year. Instantly, a strong sense of defeat rose within her. Ron, standing nearby, offered an awkward smile. I learned a little magic too. Sunshine, daisies, buttermellow. He waved his wand at the aging gray rat in his hand, which was missing a toe, but nothing happened. Ron awkwardly picked up Scabbers and examined him, finding no change whatsoever. George and them clearly taught me this. They really were lying to me. Harry beside him felt a little uneasy. Although he was now a young wizard and sitting on the Hogwarts Express, he hadn't encountered any of the knowledge found in spell books. Fortunately, Ron also seemed completely clueless about magic, so Harry curiously glanced at Luke. Hermione, on the other hand, drew out her wand and gently flicked it in front of Harry's eyes. Repaired as new. Reparo. The crack on his glasses lens instantly vanished. Harry was surprised, reaching up to touch his lens. That's amazing. Hermione looked at Luke beside her, a little shy. He is much better than I am. After speaking, she buried her head back into her pile of books. The trolley witch's voice came through. Hello, does anyone need licorice wands, pumpkin juice, chocolate frogs, or other little snacks? Ron immediately looked awkward. I brought my own lunch. He pulled out a crumpled, squashed sandwich that was barely recognizable. Harry, meanwhile, pulled several galleons directly from his pocket and, under the astonished gaze of the trolley witch, bought a large bag of snacks before finally stopping. Hermione waved her hand and took a bottle of iced lemonade from the trolley. Luke scanned the trolley with a smile, noticing several items that looked like vegetables and spices, and decided to buy them all. Ron clearly smiled thanks to Harry generously sharing his snacks. Seeing Luke's actions, Ron tried to stop him. Luke, those few things genuinely taste awful. Almost no one buys them. Don't be fooled by their appearance. Hearing Ron's words, Luke smiled slightly. It's all right, I prefer hot, steaming food. These can be used as ingredients. Ron and the others exchanged confused glances. Where on this train was there any hot, steaming food? It was then that Luke gently stroked the alchemy grimoire beside him. The book-shaped alchemical creation, driven by both magic and intention. The alchemy grimoire transformed into something resembling a gas stove. It emitted an orange-red glow throughout its body. Luke reached up to the luggage rack and retrieved a crystal cauldron, transparent and sparkling. After pouring in clean water, he surprisingly pulled instant noodles directly out of his smaller suitcase. And those strange-tasting snacks he had just purchased, which others found peculiar, now served as seasoning in his hands. Flames rose, and the ingredients in the crystal cauldron made constant bubbling sounds. A strange yet rich aroma spread throughout the carriage. Ron had been happily eating a chocolate frog, but upon smelling this aroma, he suddenly swallowed with a gulp, his eyes fixed on the crystal cauldron where Luke was cooking the noodles. His eyes were full of disbelief and longing. What is that? Why does it smell so good? Even my mum's cooking seems much worse compared to this. Harry wasn't doing much better nearby, the steam fogging up his glasses and blocking his view. He had certainly seen and eaten instant noodles before. After all, besides those in the wizard world, who in the muggle world hasn't seen instant noodles? But what surprised him was that Luke, using some unknown method, had made these noodles smell absolutely soul-stirringly fragrant. Purely in terms of sensory stimulation, the smell was sharper than preserved mustard greens, making it impossible for him to look away. Hermione, who had just been engrossed in a text about fantastic beasts, was instantly pulled back to reality by the powerful aroma. Watching the soup noodles constantly rolling in Luke's crystal cauldron. The hunger she had managed to suppress suddenly became uncontrollable. How could a bowl of instant noodles be this fragrant? It was absurd. Gulp Tilda. Seeing Hermione also looking eager. Luke knew they had taken the bait. Before entering Hogwarts, this train was perhaps the best place for him to harvest emotional value. These instant noodles had been carefully selected by him. The only thing that surprised even him was that people in the magic world actually made spices into snacks. No wonder most people couldn't tolerate eating them alone. But for Luke, the quasi-god of cookery, these spices were the perfect addition. Seeing their eyes glaze over, Luke couldn't help but chuckle. How about you all have a taste? Hermione was still a little embarrassed. Ron, however, had already extended his hand, saying, "This isn't good." The next moment, he took the small bowl and began to chew ravenously. He had never imagined that this magical noodle soup could be so delicious, and its aroma seemed to carry a certain magic, making it impossible to stop eating. The slightly spicy taste made his face flush a little. Looking at Harry and Hermione next to him, Ron could barely lift his head, muttering, "Delicious. You guys eat too." Harry was a bit speechless at the sight. Ron, that guy, when he sees food, he really can't be polite at all. However, after tasting it, Harry and Hermione successively immersed themselves in it, and the entire private room was left with only the sound of slurping noodles. Luke's fingers flipped. He added a lot more seasonings and then served himself a small bowl. He just didn't know that under his deliberate actions, the young wizards on the entire Hogwarts Express were suffering. In the adjacent private room, just separated by a wall, several young wizards were originally chatting happily, but suddenly smelled this rich aroma, which seemed to awaken one's cravings, and their speech immediately slowed down. One young wizard's stomach rumbled, feeling a bit awkward. He quickly pulled a chocolate from his bag and began to chew. Seeing this, the others also rummaged around for snacks. They, who had originally been able to resist, gradually fell silent after smelling the aroma. Soon, this situation spread throughout the entire Hogwarts Express. What's that smell? It's too fragrant. But the snacks sold from the trolley just now didn't have this smell. A strange atmosphere emerged. The young wizards chewed their snacks, but they felt like chewing wax. Some even felt that if this continued, they might have to gnaw on the train itself. The aroma lingered, making people unbearably hungry. At this moment, the few people in Luke's compartment had finished their instant noodles, their faces adorned with satisfied smiles. Luke listened to the continuous notifications in his mind, the smile on his lips deepening. Congratulations, host, for harvesting Harry Potter's positive emotional value plus 300. Congratulations, host, for harvesting Ron Weasley's positive emotional value plus 200. Congratulations, host, for harvesting Ron Weasley's positive emotional value plus 150. Congratulations, host, for harvesting Hermione Granger's positive emotional value plus 200. Listening to the mechanical voice echoing continuously, Luke's smile was irrepressible. However, at this moment, he, who had been full of joyful smiles, suddenly trembled slightly. Congratulations, host, for harvesting young wizard's negative emotional value plus 80. Congratulations, host, for harvesting trolley vendor's negative emotional value plus 300. Congratulations, host, for harvesting Draco Malfoy's negative emotional value plus 200. Looking at the almost continuous string of negative emotional values, Luke was momentarily stunned. So, besides positive emotions, there are also negative ones. But where did these negative values come from? But he hadn't done anything bad. Luke pondered for a long time, feeling a bit bewildered. How could he know that at this moment, the entire Hogwarts Express was in an uproar? The aroma was too tormenting, whether it was newly admitted young wizards or older students, all were on the verge of tears. Smelling something so fragrant, yet being unable to eat it, was simply torture. Woo-woo. As the train whistle roared, Hermione, blushing, put her bowl back in its place and said to the others. It seems we're almost at school. We should change into our wizard robes as soon as possible and get ready to get off. Ron only then seemed to wake up from a dream. Luke picked up his suitcase and pushed it onto the carriage where no horses were waiting. Their luggage would eventually be sent into the castle. And next to them, a terrifying half-giant, more than 3 meters tall, came over. Harry pointed to this shaggy bearded, beast-maned half-giant and said. This is Hagrid, he's the keeper of keys at Hogwarts, and a good friend of mine. He has half-giant bloodline. Ron exclaimed loudly upon hearing this. Harry, awesome, awesome. Luke looked at Hagrid, who was twice his height, a hint of surprise flashing in his eyes. A height of over 3 meters was almost unimaginable in normal circumstances, but on Hagrid's physique, it surprisingly appeared harmonious. So this is the half-giant bloodline. Luke secretly marveled. Then, led by Hagrid, everyone boarded small boats. The Black Lake's waters were surging with waves as evening approached. Hagrid pointed to the castle on the hillside in the distance, grinning. Welcome to Hogwarts. That will be a place you'll never forget. Following Hagrid's finger, a huge, ancient castle stood majestically. The moon in the solitary clouds faintly illuminated the air, and the castle appeared grand and mysterious under the night sky. Luke took a deep breath, his mind shaken. It's truly different from what he imagined when he got close. So, this is Hogwarts. So big. The young wizards gathered in 2s and 3s, and the small boats began to move towards the main gate of Hogwarts. However, there was a breeze on the Black Lake at this time, and although each small boat had a brass lamp, the light it emitted seemed a bit too dim. Although these small boats were automatically driven by magic, everyone still instinctively gripped the boat's edge. As they passed under the bridge above Hogwarts, a huge wave crashed over, and the magical light on the brass lamps flickered. The already panicked young wizards immediately shrieked. Neville, on the small boat next to Luke, was momentarily careless and lost his grip. He fell straight into the water. The icy lake water instantly submerged him, and he screamed. The young wizards were too scared to breathe, only watching Neville in horror. Hagrid next to them immediately looked tense. He had made a mistake again in leading the young wizards. Hagrid, who was a bit thick-headed, didn't seem to react to save him, while Luke, on the other hand, watched Neville draw his wand and point it, waving. Wingardium Leviosa. As Luke's voice fell, a rich wave of magic flowed around Neville. Neville instantly felt his body lighten, and the next moment he was already floating on the water's surface. As Luke's wand moved gently, Neville successfully landed on the small boat he was in. Many young wizards cheered as they witnessed Luke's exquisite magic. Well done, Luke. More and more people learned Luke's name. Draco Malfoy, not far away, had a silent expression. This guy named Luke was becoming more and more annoying to him. Not only did he hang out with Harry Potter and the others whom he disliked the most, but he also performed so brilliantly, which made him extremely unhappy. Only then did Hagrid, as if waking from a dream, turn to Luke with some nervousness. Thank you so much. If it weren't for you, I would have caused big trouble just now. Hagrid, with thick knuckles, looking like a wall, thanked Luke while riding his own small boat. Luke waved his hand. It's what I should do. We're about to enter Hogwarts. Hagrid nodded and said to everyone, everyone watch your step, we're about to land, and no more young wizards should fall into the water, or I'll be in big trouble. Hagrid's words immediately drew laughter from most people. Everyone walked into Hogwarts in an orderly fashion. The magnificent main gate of the massive Hogwarts castle was adorned with elaborate patterns, and the bright light from the Great Hall seeped through the cracks, bringing warmth. The gate was pushed open by Hagrid with a creak, and the next moment, a bright light instantly illuminated the eyes of all the young wizards. Professor McGonagall, who had been waiting for a long time, looked at the many young wizards at this moment. Welcome to Hogwarts. This is about to become your second home during your growth. I hope you will study hard and embrace life. Alright, let us go inside. Everyone has been waiting for quite some time. Led by Professor McGonagall, the crowd began to queue up and enter. Neville, standing nearby, looked at Luke at the very end with a slight tremble and whispered. Thank you so much, Luke. You have helped me twice now. Luke waved his hand dismissively. Immediately, bright light shone down, and the entire Hogwarts Great Hall was completely lit up. Countless candles floated in the air, and the dome above showed the appearance of a star map, constantly rotating and demonstrating the changing seasons. The young wizards could barely take it all in. Beside the 4 extremely long tables sat countless older wizard students. Right in the center, a familiar yet vigorous elderly voice rang out. Welcome. Welcome to Hogwarts. Professor McGonagall stood directly in front of the faculty area. Next, before you formally take your seats, we must hold a very solemn sorting ceremony. You will put on the sorting hat, and it will discern your characteristics. It will decide which house you will enter for your studies over the next 7 years. We are always full of anticipation for this. Ron Weasley, standing nearby, immediately breathed a sigh of relief and said to Harry and Luke. I knew George and Fred were lying to me before. They even told me that to get sorted into Hogwarts, you had to defeat a troll. I was nervous for so long. I never thought it was just a simple hat test. A low, flat stool was placed in the center of the hall, and on it sat a dusty, somewhat grubby hat. Professor McGonagall unrolled the parchment in her hand. Now, we will proceed with the sorting. As a little girl nervously walked up and put on the rumored sorting hat. Moments later, the loud, high-pitched voice of the sorting hat rang out. Hannah Abbott. Hufflepuff. The next was Draco Malfoy. Under everyone's gaze, Draco proudly raised his head and looked toward the Slytherin long table nearby, where the symbol of the snake house was extremely obvious on the green tablecloth. He proudly sat down on the stool. The next moment, the wizard hat impatiently shouted. Slytherin. Following the wizard hat's choice, a deafening cheer erupted from the Slytherin long table. The young master of the House of Malfoy was a naturally pure Slytherin. Naturally, these arrogant, ambitious, and goal-oriented little snakes were happy to see this. As Draco walked down the steps, his eyes swept toward Luke, as if telling him. Only truly noble people like him could enter Slytherin. Immediately afterward, Ron Weasley, Hermione Granger, and Harry Potter, the 3 core young wizards they had met on the train, were all sorted into Gryffindor. When everyone's gaze turned to Luke Graves, who was last. Professor McGonagall's gaze seemed kind. Luke, we finally meet again. Luke nodded slightly, saluting McGonagall. Draco Malfoy, watching from afar, felt a slight pang of jealousy. This guy even knows the deputy principal. Judging by the look of it, did Professor McGonagall guide him into the school? After a month of study room cleansing, Draco Malfoy had not actually learned much of a lesson. Instead, he had frantically searched for information about the Graves family in the study room of the family manor. In the end, he came to the conclusion, there was no such pure-blood family in the wizarding world at all. Which meant Luke actually had no background. In that case, there was still a chance for that maid owl. Luke Graves, standing in the back row, finally sat down on the high stool. When the wizard hat was placed on his head, the wizard hat began to mutter. Oh, wisdom, studio useness, perhaps you should be sorted into Ravenclaw. No, wait, you are also brave enough, even persistent, Gryffindor might be a good choice. No. You already possess honor, sufficient status, and occupy an upward position on the pyramid. Do you want to go to Slytherin? The sorting hat actively absorbed Luke's stray thoughts, but found it increasingly difficult to choose. When it absorbed Luke's knowledge and skills regarding cooking, it was instantly surprised. Luke matched the characteristics of almost every house, including Hufflepuff, which made the decision even harder. The Sorting Hat was slow to decide, and the young wizards in the entire hall immediately grew noisy. Ron Weasley's eyes, watching from afar, gleamed with anticipation. It would be great if Luke could come to Gryffindor. That way we could frequently eat that delicious instant noodles, it is truly unforgettable. Ron Weasley muttered below, instantly generating a strong emotional value. Even though he was not eating at the moment, he still generated a full 20 points of magic emotional value. The floating emotion was about to fall into the system. And the Sorting Hat seemed to sense some inexplicable magic. Ding! The host has harvested Ron Weasley's positive emotional value of 20 through gourmet food. Ding! Unknown magical item has absorbed magic emotional value -2. This time, Luke was truly surprised. He did not expect the Sorting Hat could actually intercept a portion of his emotional value. Although it was only a meager 2 points, it was enough to shock him. And the Sorting Hat seemed stunned for a moment, immediately followed by a feeling of joy and excitement. Oh, this is incredible. What was that just now? Such rich emotional fluctuations. It was actually so delicious. The Sorting Hat chattered endlessly, while Luke felt a bit awkward on the side. If this continued, who knew what the Sorting Hat might say? The waters of the wizarding world were truly deep. A wizard hat could actually peek into the emotional value needed by the system. Could you please sort me into a house first? Everyone below is waiting. Luke's words made the Sorting Hat momentarily conflicted. But, all 4 houses are extremely suitable for your characteristics, which makes the choice very difficult. Luke's lips curled up slightly. In that case, I will choose Hufflepuff. After all, I once had a wish to become a cooking god, and now entering the wizarding world, becoming the cooking god of Hogwarts seems like a decent alternative. The Sorting Hat was silent for a moment. Are you really willing to go to Hufflepuff? In my opinion, Hufflepuff's traits are not distinct enough. Luke nodded. I think the atmosphere in Hufflepuff is quite good. The Sorting Hat hesitated for a moment, then suddenly lowered its voice. Could you share a little more of that emotional magic with me, just like before? I feel that after absorbing that unknown emotion, my thoughts seem to become more active. As you wizards would say, it is like growing a brain. The Sorting Hat revealed a subtle smile. If you give me some more of that emotional value, I will let you go to Hufflepuff, how about that? Luke waved his hand. That thing is not under my control. The Sorting Hat wanted to say more, but saw Professor McGonagall already walking toward Luke. Immediately, it fell silent for a moment, then shouted in a deafening voice. Hufflepuff. Whoosh. Almost everyone was surprised that a young wizard could make the Sorting Hat deliberate for so long. It even lasted much longer than the legendary savior, Harry Potter. The longer the hesitation, the more traits a student possessed, which also meant that the young wizard's future achievements would be extraordinary. This has been evident in almost all past students. However, Luke, who had almost made the Sorting Hat silent for half an hour, was assigned to the seemingly unremarkable Hufflepuff. This immediately surprised everyone. Luke walked to the Hufflepuff long table amidst everyone's astonished gazes, and was immediately met with enthusiastic cheers. However, to everyone's surprise, a faint magical glow suddenly blossomed above Luke's head as he sat at the Hufflepuff table. The Sorting Hat, which had already been in Professor McGonagall's hand, appeared above Luke's head as if by teleportation. The surrounding wizards immediately burst into an uproar. What's going on? Luke actually attracted the Sorting Hat. Does it like Luke? What kind of talent must one possess for the Sorting Hat to be so reluctant to part? Luke was a little embarrassed, and the Sorting Hat chattered on. Such a delicious thing, please, you must give me some more. Seeing that he had already caused a commotion, Luke immediately took off the Sorting Hat and whispered. I don't know when I'll have such strange power again, but when I do, how about I share it with you then? The Sorting Hat seemed to ponder, then said. It's a deal. Professor McGonagall hurried over, looking at Luke with surprise, as if she wanted to see through him. After a while, her gaze shifted to the Sorting Hat, and seeing that it had quieted down, Professor McGonagall scrutinized Luke, then nodded slightly at him. Luke handed over the Sorting Hat, and Dumbledore watched from afar, giving Luke an approving look. Then, the Elder Wand was pressed to his throat, and his voice was terrifyingly loud, deafening like a loudspeaker. Congratulations everyone, the sorting is over. Before the feast begins, I'd like to say a few words, and that is, nitwit. Blubber. Oddment. Tweak. Thank you. He finished speaking and sat down. The previously empty golden plates were instantly filled with countless overflowing foods. Roast beef, pork chops, sausages, potatoes, pudding, pea shoots, ketchup, and even peppermint candy. Ron, who had been tormented by Luke's instant noodles all the way, now grabbed 2 chicken legs and ate with both hands. Although eating Luke's instant noodles made these other foods somewhat underwhelming, at least the portions were generous. Ron, eating heartily, regretfully glanced at Luke from afar and said to Harry beside him, "It's such a shame, it would have been great if Luke had been sorted into Gryffindor too." Everyone was completely engrossed in eating and drinking, even the professors at the staff table were dining. When everyone finished eating and drinking, Dumbledore stood up again. "This academic year, Professor Snape will continue to be the potions master, and we welcome our new defense against the dark arts teacher, Professor Quirrell. Also, first-year students, please note that the Forbidden Forest on campus is off-limits to students, and some of our older students also need to remember these things well. And I must tell everyone, anyone who doesn't wish to suffer an accident or a painful death, please do not enter the corridor on the right side of the 4th floor. Additionally, second-year students and above who wish to participate in Quidditch need to sign up with Madam Hooch. Finally, please sing the Hogwarts school song in your preferred tune." Once everyone had finished singing, Dumbledore then directed everyone to leave in an orderly fashion. The Hufflepuff common room was next to the kitchen on the ground floor. Luke looked at the circular wooden door and the warm air emanating from inside when it opened, and immediately felt a wave of drowsiness. However, upon entering the common room, a very handsome young man was standing in the room, clapping his hands to get everyone's attention. He pointed at Luke and the others, smiling. "We Hufflepuff freshmen have a special welcome ceremony. I imagine anyone who gets into Hufflepuff must have a fondness for good food. Since you're all gathered here, let's give our juniors the warmest welcome." The handsome boy jumped down and directly put his arm around Luke's shoulder. "Hello, my name is Cedric, I'm a 3rd year. Welcome to Hufflepuff." As for Hannah Abbott, she was pulled aside by other senior girls and chatted with endlessly. Amidst the cheers, Cedric and a few others secretly slipped out of the common room, then quickly returned. A huge tray was filled with food that had disappeared from the feast earlier. Cedric pointed to the platter and said to everyone, "We ate too quickly just now, and I'm sure some of you aren't full yet. Here are plenty of freshly made egg tarts by the house elves, I wonder who would like some." Everyone left the common room amidst laughter and chatter. Luke, slowly reclining on the sofa, caressed the alchemical grimoire in his hand. He had just put all his luggage into his room, and then returned to the common room. Although there wasn't a single soul in the common room at the moment, Luke, almost by muscle memory, sat by the fireplace. The alchemical magic unfolded, transforming into a small snack stall, its brass lamp sign emitting a warm glow. Luke then skillfully began to process the steamed potatoes. He had asked Cedric to help him get some potatoes and other ingredients earlier. Although Cedric and the others were a little puzzled, they still took great care of their junior. Luke slowly prepared the ingredients, brushed them with oil, and roasted them. Then came a sizzling sound, and the potatoes developed a golden, crispy crust. With Luke's secret seasoning added, a rich, spicy aroma immediately spread. Everyone had almost fallen asleep, but this aroma slowly diffused. Hannah Abbott, in the girls' dormitory, couldn't help but turn over. She had just fallen asleep when she smelled an indescribably delicious scent. Turning over and sitting up, she looked confusedly at the black and yellow silk canopy above her head, wondering, where is it? Despite the long journey, she was still a girl from the leaky cauldron. The pub's evening hours were not short. Hannah Abbott nimbly got out of bed. When she saw the patch of drool on her pillow, she immediately looked around awkwardly and guiltily, seeing that no one was paying attention to her, all still in dreamland. Hannah Abbott then tiptoed out of the room. The aroma was simply too enticing. Even after having a second meal in the Hufflepuff common room, her craving seemed to have been awakened. Where is it? What is this scent? At this moment, Hannah Abbott was muttering to herself. Anyone whose peaceful sleep was disturbed after an exhausting day would likely not be in a good mood. But the aroma was simply too fragrant. Despite the temptation of the delicious food, Hannah Abbott still felt her stomach was quite full. However, the urge to eat simply wouldn't stop. She put her clothes back on and slowly walked out of the room, following the scent. In the dimly lit corridor, the aroma grew even stronger. Yet, Hannah Abbott sniffed her way past every dormitory, still unable to pinpoint whose room the smell was emanating from. At that moment, she looked exactly like a thief. Not knowing the source of the scent, she truly couldn't fall asleep. Tiptoeing, she finally reached the end of the corridor. Past the spiral staircase was the Hufflepuff common room. Could someone possibly still be eating at this hour? Hannah Abbott found it hard to believe. Although Hufflepuff's tradition was to be good at eating, fond of eating, and skilled in eating. But at this late hour, if someone was still eating, what kind of ancient magical creature reincarnation must they be? That would be terrifying. Moreover, this aroma was exceedingly tempting, almost on par with the feeling she had experienced earlier on the train. Back on the train, Hannah Abbott and the others in her compartment were practically drooling with desire. Especially since she had been helping clean the shop before boarding. She hadn't even had time for breakfast before being taken to King's Cross Station via apparition. That feeling of hunger had been oppressive, and she had barely managed to buy a chocolate bar on the train to tide her over, all while eagerly awaiting the Hogwarts welcome dinner for new students. Who knew someone on the train would release poison, a figurative term for extremely tempting food. That aroma, which penetrated the soul, was unbearable. That scent tormented their stomachs. Who knew it would happen again now? The aroma drifted over once more. Although the smell was different from before, the feeling it evoked was identical. Slowly walking down the steps, Hannah Abbott suddenly froze. Under the dim yellow light, Luke was peeling potatoes. His practiced skill, set against the backdrop of the snack stall, created a strangely harmonious scene. The golden, crispy roasted potatoes emitted an enchanting scent. Special seasoning sprinkled on the potatoes intensified the fragrance. Hannah Abbott felt a sudden tightness in her chest, so this was the source of the aroma. But, what exactly was this snack stall? Hearing the noise, Luke immediately looked up and saw that it was the daughter of the Leaky Cauldron's owner. Hannah Abbott. He immediately smiled. I didn't expect you to be the first one to show up. Hannah Abbott truly wanted to roll her eyes right then, but smelling the aroma, her mouth shamelessly started watering. Luke gestured toward the sofa by the fireplace, signaling for Hannah Abbott to come over. Immediately, his skillful knife work was displayed. The silver knife sliced through the golden, crispy potato, and a plume of hot steam instantly rushed out. Soft and fluffy. The texture was dense and smooth. The potato's fragrance erupted in a rush of steam. The potato was instantly divided into bite-sized portions, and combined with the spices, the aroma was overwhelming. Before she knew it, Hannah Abbott had already taken the plate. Luke smiled at her and said, "Have a taste." Hannah Abbott felt a little embarrassed, but she still tried a piece. The next moment, her eyes lit up. Although she had eaten so much that she felt she needed a digestive aid, this potato tasted absolutely wonderful. At that moment, she even felt a little regretful. If she had known there was something this delicious available later, she would have eaten less of everything else. It was all Senior Cedric's fault, and the young wizard Welcome Feast's fault. She felt like a victim now. Ding! Congratulations to the host for harvesting 80 emotion points from Hannah Abbott. Luke immediately smiled, looking at Hannah Abbott with a gentle expression. That will be one canute, please. Little Hannah was momentarily stunned. Huh. Money. She genuinely couldn't wrap her head around it at the moment. Luke pointed to his small stall. Sorry, I'm running a small business here. Hannah immediately felt like pouting. If you said Luke was greedy, he was only charging her one canute for this delicious food, and one canute couldn't even buy a raw potato. But if you said Luke was shrewd, he actually charged money for the food he made. Honestly, what difference did charging one canute make? However, seeing Luke's unexpectedly sincere gaze, Hannah Abbott still blushed and pulled out the money. Luke immediately nodded. You've eaten quite a bit, it's time to go to sleep. Hannah's face turned frighteningly red, and she left the dream-like stall reluctantly, looking back every few steps. Under the stairs leading to the boys' dormitory, a figure suddenly appeared. He appeared tall and handsome. Senior Cedric. No matter how hard Hannah Abbott thought, she never expected the second victim to be the third-year senior. And hadn't he been the one who helped everyone eat the most earlier? She felt a little envious of Cedric. She wondered how he managed to maintain his figure normally. His handsome appearance hadn't been ruined by excessive eating resulting in weight gain. The fact that he was sneaking over here for a late-night snack now was extremely surprising to her. Cedric stared straight at Luke, his eyes showing disbelief. Hey, Luke, today's your first day of school. Isn't it late? Aren't you tired? And what exactly are you making? It smells too good. I can't possibly fall asleep smelling this. Who can resist this stuff late at night? Saying this, Cedric reached out and grabbed a golden, crispy potato slice. The potato was coated in seasoning. Cedric ate with a hurried yet elegant manner. It's hot, but it's absolutely delicious. Cedric looked intoxicated, then glanced at Luke. Luke, however, continued to hold out his hand. Senior Cedric, one canute. Ah. Cedric froze for a moment, then blushed and said. Well, I rushed out and didn't bring any money. I'll go get it for you right now. Luke chuckled slightly. Senior, you don't have to rush. Just go to sleep peacefully, and we can settle it in the morning. Cedric was a little bewildered but readily followed Luke's advice. Footsteps sounded behind Hannah Abbott, who was hiding in the corner. Hannah immediately panicked and darted back into her dormitory like a swift, agile feline. However, after hearing the footsteps retreat, Hannah suddenly felt embarrassed. After all, for a girl, eating a third late-night snack was simply too shameful. But, now it seemed she wasn't the only one. Hannah, lost in thought, finally drifted into sleep, only to be woken by the sounds around her, feeling as if she had just fallen asleep. Seeing the little witches in her dorm getting ready, Hannah Abbott sat up with a start, like a carp leaping out of water. What time is it? Usually, she was the first one up in the common room. How could it be that last night? As her thoughts drifted, she remembered that scent, that potato. Hannah Abbott, somewhat dazed, asked her dorm mates. Last night, did you get to eat the baked potatoes Luke made? The others looked clearly bewildered, and one of the girls stared at her blankly. Huh. Hannah Abbott, what nonsense are you talking about? What time was it after the celebration last night? Weren't you asleep? Did you perhaps dream about Luke last night? Hannah Abbott's face immediately flushed red. She looked at the other girl. I'm not. I didn't. Don't talk nonsense. And Luke definitely baked potatoes last night. She looked down at the dried drool on her pillowcase, convinced of it. However, when she saw that the others' pillowcases were all washed and hung up, she immediately laughed. Oh, you dared to trick me, when each of you was drooling in your dreams. At this, the other girls playfully pounced on Hannah Abbott, tickling her relentlessly. So, there was good food last night, and you didn't tell us, keeping it all to yourself, right? Luke is that handsome young wizard who just started in our house, isn't he? I remember him skillfully using the levitation charm on the boat to save Neville Longbottom from Gryffindor. Seeing how proficient he was with his magic, it was indeed impressive. And you also said he was selling baked potatoes last night. Although they were somewhat disbelieving, their pillowcases unanimously confirmed this point. The girls played around together, then opened the door. However, as they pushed open the door, they suddenly froze, a rich aroma of wheat wafting towards them. For them, who hadn't eaten breakfast yet, this was nothing short of an assault. One little witch immediately asked in a daze. I remember asking a senior last night, Hogwarts breakfast time is 8:30 in the morning. But it's not even 8 o'clock yet, where is this smell coming from? Some little witches immediately whispered. I heard that our Hufflepuff common room is the closest to the Hogwarts kitchens, and we can find a lot of food there. Perhaps this smell is coming from the kitchens. Hannah Abbott immediately shook her head. Impossible. No one knows the location of the kitchens except for Cedric and a few other seniors. And given the secrecy of the kitchens, if they don't want us to smell anything, it's impossible to catch even a hint of a scent. After all, house elves aren't like us, just newly enrolled and unable to do any magic. The little witches argued back and forth. However, Hannah Abbott suddenly froze, a possibility surfacing in her mind. No way. She was somewhat stunned, and the more she thought about it, the more plausible it seemed. After eliminating all other options, the one that seemed most impossible should be the answer. Hannah Abbott's eyes widened. Doesn't he sleep? At this moment, Hannah Abbott was eager to verify her idea, quickly gathered her things, and rushed out like a flash. Seeing her behavior, the other little witches asked one after another, "Where is she going?" Hannah Abbott mumbled, "It's very likely Luke is making food right now." The little witches looked at each other, then giggled together. "I think dreaming and drooling is probably no longer the most interesting topic among us." Hannah Abbott, she mentioned Luke again. Is she really in heat? On the other side, Hannah Abbott rushed out of the girls' dorm, turned the corner of the stairs, and finally saw the scene in the common room. However, the sight before her left her somewhat stunned. She saw many Hufflepuff young wizards queuing in an orderly fashion, while many young wizards who had already received their food were sitting on sofas, benches, or even gathered in small groups, eagerly eating soft, wobbly steamed buns. Hannah Abbott's gaze swept across the source of this magical scene, and she saw Luke indeed setting up a stall. And his stall no longer contained baked potatoes. Instead, he was opening basket after basket of never-before-seen white bread. The pleats on the bread were arranged extremely tightly and beautifully, and the smell was surprisingly enticing. Hannah Abbott was stunned. Her imagination had actually become reality. If she remembered correctly, Luke had been setting up his stall almost until late last night, and this early morning, he was selling steamed buns again. Doesn't he need to sleep? However, her body was still extremely honest, and she joined the long line of queuing young wizards. Hannah Abbott, somewhat bewildered, turned to look at Cedric, who was also queuing beside her, and asked, somewhat shyly but urgently. Cedric, didn't you already come out to eat baked potatoes last night? What's going on now? A hint of embarrassment immediately appeared on Cedric's refined and handsome face. The fact that he had secretly come out for a third late-night snack last night had been discovered, and by a junior no less. But at this moment, as he smelled the wheat aroma from ahead, his steps remained firm. Hannah Abbott, I heard Luke launched an Eastern delicacy called steamed buns this morning, and there are two kinds of fillings. One is brown sugar red bean paste, and the other is the unheard of chili oil mapo tofu filling. Look at the expressions of the others eating it. I'm genuinely a bit hungry. Hannah Abbott was silent, then nodded in agreement. How could the food Luke made be so delicious? It was almost beyond common sense. Did he add magic to the breakfast? The two gradually approached with the queue, and when Hannah Abbott finally ate a steamed bun, she was immediately amazed. Woo, this is too delicious. It was hard to imagine what adjectives to use to describe this feeling. In Britain, a desert of fine cuisine, she had never experienced such a unique taste. Pizza toppings mixed with cheese might stimulate appetite, but they had never seen a dish where the entire filling could be wrapped in dough, and with rich soup inside. The taste was simply indescribably thrilling. Hannah Abbott couldn't resist ordering 4 steamed buns, and then, under Luke's gentle smile, she heard the familiar reminder. That'll be 4 nuts. Hannah Abbott was already somewhat used to Luke. She was certain this was one of Luke's peculiar quirks. This stuff really didn't make any money. What could one Canute buy? It wasn't even worthy of polishing the shoes of these delicious steamed buns. If someone wanted to snatch the steamed buns from her hand, even for 3 sickles, or even a galleon, she would have to think about it first. The surrounding aroma grew stronger, and more young wizards began to linger around the stall. And Luke, feeling the emotion points almost flooding his mind, grinned widely. Good, good, good. Hogwarts truly was a blessed land, he hadn't come to the wrong place. And Hufflepuff truly lived up to its reputation as a gathering place for foodies. This passion for food almost made him excited to tears. As for money, Luke said, how much money could a young wizard have? Even if they were rich, could they be richer than him? At the same moment, the long tables in the Great Hall of Hogwarts were laden with various delicacies. Young wizards from various houses arrived successively for their meals. But what was extremely strange was that there wasn't a single soul at the Hufflepuff long table. Harry and Ron were a bit bewildered, seeing a Hufflepuff student pass by in the distance, walking straight towards the classroom building. Ron immediately rushed up and stopped the person. Where are the people from your house? Why isn't anyone here for breakfast? Breakfast. The other person paused, seemingly licking their lips as if still savoring a taste. I had breakfast, but this morning we ate something extraordinary. The taste was so fragrant it was intoxicating. The Hufflepuff student said, seemingly about to drool again. If he hadn't truly been full, he would have even wanted to go back and buy 2 more buns to try. Alas, what a mistake. Perhaps saving them for lunch would also be a good option. Seeing the Hufflepuff student lost in thought, Ron quickly asked, "What did you eat? What could smell so good that there's not a single Hufflepuff in sight?" The other person instantly looked at Harry and Ron with alert. He felt that Luke couldn't make many of those buns, and it was already sheer luck that the Hufflepuff seniors got to eat them. If others found out, wouldn't the seniors beat them to death with sticks? The young wizard quickly shook his head. "I don't know, I was just making things up. Maybe everyone isn't hungry today." Seeing the young wizard leave in a hurry, Ron seemed to have gained an omniscient perspective. He smelled a different scent. Merlin's beard. He pointed at the departing Hufflepuff student and said, "Harry, I swear I smelled a faint fragrance on him. Although it's hard to describe, the feeling is too tormenting." He glanced at the cheese and pumpkin pies piled on the long table and suddenly felt no appetite. Pulling Harry, he said, "I have a hunch that Luke is probably responsible for all of this. If we miss this meal, we'll regret it for a whole year." Harry was a bit confused. He was about to sit down and eat. Hearing Ron say that, his mind also jolted. "Are you saying Luke is making food in Hufflepuff?" Harry's eyes also lit up. Living at Uncle Vernon's house for a long time didn't offer any good treatment. Although the food at Hogwarts was extremely abundant and allowed everyone to eat until they were full. However, compared to the food Luke made, it was a far cry. At this moment, Ron was like a detective possessed. His brain quickly started working. Assuming Luke was making breakfast, then according to the Hufflepuff student's appearance just now, he should be making food in his own common room. After all, if it were anywhere else, the young wizards from other houses should have noticed. Ron, looking like a food enthusiast, quickly dragged Harry out of the Great Hall. They happened to run into Hermione, who had just finished tidying up. Hermione was a bit stunned, but she still raised her head. "You two are too playful, aren't you? Breakfast is a must, only by consuming enough nutrients, and not too much, as that makes you sleepy, can you maintain a clear mind for studying." Seeing her about to launch into a long lecture, Ron suddenly got anxious and grabbed Hermione, pulling her outside. Hermione's face instantly flushed red. What are you doing? Let go of me." Ron whispered to Hermione. "Don't make a sound. We've figured out that Luke is making delicious food in the Hufflepuff common room. Right now, we're going to sneak over, otherwise, it probably won't be our turn." Hermione originally wanted to struggle, but when she heard Ron say that Luke was making breakfast, her eyes immediately lit up. She had wanted to retort, but having eaten Luke's cooking, she naturally knew the value of his food. She immediately shut her mouth. Ron dragged and pulled her all the way to the Hufflepuff common room next to the kitchen on the first floor. Young wizards kept coming out, their faces beaming with happy and satisfied glows. Ron quickly seized the moment when the door opened, pulling Harry and Hermione inside. As soon as they entered, they were startled by the rich aroma. Then, looking at the many Hufflepuff young wizards queuing, their eyes widened. I knew I wasn't wrong. Ron proudly puffed out his chest. Hermione wanted to say something more, but looking at Luke in the distance, focused and with nimble fingers, she found herself speechless. "All right. First, queue up and eat, then tell Ron that this is wrong." Harry was extremely excited. After all, he had never encountered such delicious food. He quietly looked around, a little embarrassed. He was afraid that the other Hufflepuff young wizards would discover the three of them. After all, 3 little lions mixed in with a group of little badgers certainly looked a bit conspicuous. However, he still underestimated the power of food. Or perhaps he underestimated the laid-back mentality of the little badgers. Not a single person looked up at them, they were all immersed in the food. One young wizard grimaced, scalded, but couldn't bear to let a single drop of red oil slide from the corner of his mouth. Other young wizards excitedly stuffed the buns into their mouths in 2 or 3 bites, only to jump around, scalded. Harry became even more eager for Luke's breakfast. Finally, it was their turn. Luke handed over the delicious food, then extended his hand towards Harry, Ron, and Hermione. One bun, one Canute. The three of them fumbled a bit. Ron was initially a little embarrassed, but when he heard Luke's answer, his eyes immediately widened. How much did you say? Luke smiled. One bun, one Canute. Ron's face instantly flushed with excitement. Luke, you really are a conscientious boss. Filled with excitement, he pulled out a dozen nuts from his pocket. Breakfast for the three of us, it's on me. This was a rare opportunity for Ron to show off. He became increasingly satisfied with Luke. This price was practically giving it away for free. The few of them ate with loud slurps, and Ron looked up to see that Luke was indeed only charging one Canute for each person's bun. Ron was momentarily distracted and got scalded. In his heart, he thought that Luke was truly unfathomable. Such delicious food for one Canute, what money was he making? It probably wasn't even enough for the materials. Ding! Congratulations, host, your spicy tofu buns have harvested 200 positive emotional points from Ron. Ding! Congratulations, host, your honey red bean paste buns have harvested 66 negative emotional points from Ron. Luke looked up in surprise and glanced at Ron in the distance. He hadn't expected Ron to generate negative emotions at this time. What was he thinking? Paper, after all, cannot wrap fire. Just as Harry and the others were enjoying their meal, young wizards from other houses naturally noticed the unusual breakfast scene. Even the gazes of Severus Snape and others in the staff dining area were constantly shifting. But when they saw little badgers occasionally walking towards the castle classrooms, they could only suppress their unusual thoughts, though the entire long table piled with untouched food did look quite conspicuous. By the Slytherin long table, Draco Malfoy was elegantly enjoying his pumpkin juice, while Crabbe and Goyle mysteriously ran over. The slightly plump Goyle stealthily looked at Draco. Draco asked suspiciously, "What, are your eyes dry? If your eyes are dry, go see the school nurse, why are you winking at me here?" Malfoy was a bit speechless. His two little followers seemed to be a bit slow-witted. However, Goyle became anxious and secretly pulled out a crumpled bun. Draco immediately said with a hint of disgust. "What is this? Where did you pull it out from?" His noble elegance made him completely unable to accept such a flattened food item. But Goyle, without explanation, directly broke it open in the middle. A rich aroma went straight up his nose. Malfoy, who was about to say something, instantly froze. Goyle, without explanation, brought the bun to Draco's mouth and whispered, "This thing is delicious. We finally managed to get it." Draco was initially somewhat repulsed and wanted to refuse, but the aroma was so rich that he was momentarily caught off guard and had his mouth stuffed. This taste. It's too fragrant. Originally, Draco Malfoy would have died rather than eat the wrinkly steamed bun that Goyle took out. As a noble, he felt that even if he starved to death, he absolutely wouldn't touch that kind of food. However, when Goyle forcefully shoved the steamed bun toward his mouth, his body was exceptionally honest. He took a shallow taste of the peculiar aroma, and it instantly struck his soul. Malfoy froze. "Oh my, it smells delicious." He proactively picked up the steamed bun and began eating. It wasn't until half the steamed bun was stuffed in his mouth that Draco Malfoy spoke, a hint of awkwardness in his expression. Although this thing looks a bit ugly, the taste seems quite good." To receive such a high evaluation from the obstinate Draco, Goyle immediately laughed and stuffed the remaining half of the steamed bun directly into his own plump mouth. Draco's face changed when he saw Goyle put the rest of the steamed bun into his own mouth. "I hadn't even finished tasting it, what are you doing?" Goyle said, sounding a little wronged. "I wasn't full either, and for something this delicious, if you weren't our boss, I definitely wouldn't have shared any with you." Draco was speechless, but the taste just now truly was unforgettable. He couldn't help but ask Goyle, "Tell me, where did this come from? They don't have this stuff on the dining tables." Goyle lowered his voice mysteriously. "I secretly overheard a few Hufflepuff students talking amongst themselves. It turns out that in their common room, the new young wizard named Luke is making breakfast. And the steamed bun just now was made by him. The taste is genuinely amazing. Besides the one you just ate, there are other fillings too. Unfortunately, we didn't bring any money when we went. Although one steamed bun only costs one Canute, we couldn't resist how delicious it smelled." Draco was momentarily stunned. He then asked in disbelief, "Are you talking about Luke from Hufflepuff House?" Goyle and Crabbe both nodded simultaneously. Malfoy's eyes immediately flickered. Selling steamed buns for breakfast, that certainly isn't the style of a noble. And messing around first thing in the morning just for a few nuts, is Luke short on money? He remembered when Luke bought clothes, he purchased 1,000 sets in one go. Now he's setting up a stall. Could it be that he was pretending to be a big shot back then? If that's the case, perhaps he still has a chance with that owl maid. Malfoy, who was becoming obsessed with Shyvana, had his eyes light up. Let's go. Since Luke is this poor, no matter how it tastes, I, Draco, must support his business. He wanted to see Luke's embarrassed state. Presumably, if he offered money to buy that owl then, Luke wouldn't have the face to refuse, right? The common room. The work in Luke's hands finally stopped. Watching the last steamer basket of buns come out, the surrounding young wizards had mostly dispersed. Luke sat contentedly on a small stool nearby, replenishing his energy. Awesome. It really was awesome. Although many young wizards came late last night for the roasted potatoes, they only came intermittently after everyone had already eaten their fill. But this morning's breakfast was truly a huge harvest for magic emotional value. Watching the emotional value continuously surge and flood the screen, Luke beamed with joy. Even if each person only generated 10 or even dozens of points of emotional value, the sheer volume was overwhelming. Shyvana, in her owl form, looked excessively cute while eating the steamed buns. Luke smiled and teased her. Then, he saw 3 figures sneakily slip into the Hufflepuff common room from outside. The arrivals were none other than Draco Malfoy and his group. Malfoy saw that Luke was genuinely setting up a stall, and a smile couldn't help but appear on his face as he spoke. I heard the steamed buns you sell are quite tasty. Give me a few more. Also, if you're short on money, you can just say so. I can hire you as my private chef. I'll give you a few galleons at least, so you don't have to earn nuts penny by penny here. Luke smiled immediately and looked at Malfoy. Thank you, but I don't need it. Luke rejected him mercilessly once again. Although Draco Malfoy was slightly annoyed, he knew why he was here, and he patiently tried to persuade Luke. I am sincerely and genuinely trying to buy your owl from you. Draco looked enviously and admiringly at Shyvana, who was eating a steamed bun nearby, his eyes practically shining. Luke rolled his eyes at him. She is my family. It is impossible to sell her. Malfoy immediately flew into a rage out of humiliation. Do you believe I'll go tell the professors that you're illegally setting up a stall and selling food here? Luke glanced at Malfoy, thinking, does this guy never give up until he gets what he wants? Goyle chimed in from the side, hand over the owl, and then give us a few more steamed buns, and we'll let you off. Luke coldly swept his gaze over the group and completely finished eating the last steamed bun. Goyle immediately grew angry and whispered to Draco. Boss, look, he's messing with you. Draco immediately felt himself losing control. That loudmouth Goyle, wasn't he just forcing the issue onto him? However, since the emotions had reached this point, Draco decided he couldn't back down, and he said to Luke. Name your price for your owl. Otherwise, don't blame me for running my mouth to the professors. Luke glanced at Draco and sneered, lunatic. Draco's face instantly flushed crimson. Don't you dare regret this. Gazes were cast over from the surroundings. Hannah Abbott and the others gathered closer, their expressions unfriendly. Malfoy realized exactly where they were and quickly left, taking Goyle and Crabbe with him. If they were trapped inside by the others, the 3 of them wouldn't gain any advantage. Once outside, Draco was exceptionally furious and absolutely refused to swallow his pride. Although there is a saying, a gentleman's revenge is never too late, even after 10 years, he truly couldn't wait. If you provoke Draco, revenge must be carried out from morning till night. He looked at Goyle next to him, his eyes shifting, and whispered to Goyle. Do you know of any relatively hidden places in our Hogwarts? I want to trick Luke into going there and lock him up, then tell a professor that he was stealing. Goyle nodded with a wicked smile. The dungeons are right near our Slytherin area, and Professor Snape's office is near the dungeons. That spot is secluded enough. Plus, I heard Filch uses the dungeons specifically to punish disobedient students. That place is secretive enough. Malfoy nodded and then looked at Crabbe nearby. I heard you have some magical little trinket on hand. Crab immediately grinned. Boss, I just brought this powerful adhesive from home. It sticks firmly to anything it touches, and without explosive magic, it definitely can't be torn off. Draco Malfoy laughed. Luke humiliated me like that. I'm going to make him pay the price he deserves. First, we'll do this. Then, we'll do that. And finally, this. Hee hee hee. Goyle and Crab. Boss, you're truly despicable. Anyone who provokes you must have 8 lifetimes of bad luck. Merlin, help us, this was all the boss's idea. Thanks for watching, please subscribe and support our channel.